Tonight, we're going to spend the next few hours living the quiet, ordinary life of someone history rarely remembers. There are no kings, no famous battles, no great discoveries. Just another day in the Middle Ages. Tonight, you walk through a quiet day with a medieval innkeeper. Not the cheerful storybook version, the real one, the tired one, the smoky one. The one made of wet rushes, heavy buckets, sore backs, shared beds, and small, unpaid debts. If quiet nights like this help you rest, you are welcome to stay with the channel. Now let the room grow a little softer. Let your breathing slow and settle into the dim warmth of a late medieval inn, where the fire has almost gone out, the yard is still dark, and the whole house smells faintly of damp wood, old ale, and sleeping horses. You wake before the light does. The inn is quiet in the way only a crowded place can be quiet. Not silent, never silent. Someone shifts behind a wall. A sleeper coughs into wool. From the yard comes the soft stamp of a horse, then another. The fire on the hearth is no more than a red thought under grey ash. You lie still for one small moment and feel the cold in the room. It has settled into the boards, into the bench by the wall, into the bucket near the door, into your hands before you even move them. This is how the day begins. Not with cheer, not with sudden purpose, with cold, with embers, with the slow work of making the house ready to be a house again. You rise from a bed that is less private than modern sleep would want. In a working inn, space belongs to use before comfort. Better chambers may exist in a richer house, and some guests pay for them when they can. But much of the sleeping here is shared, close, and practical. Straw mattress, wool blanket, breath in the dark. The house is home, but it is also business, and the line between the two is thin. Your feet find the floor. It is rough beneath you. In some parts of the inn there are rushes or straw underfoot, laid down to soften dirt or protect timber, though how often they are changed depends on money, season, and traffic. In a busy place they do not stay sweet for long. They hold dust, ash, drips of ale, bits of mud. What was dropped yesterday remains until someone bends to clear it. You go first to the hearth. This matters more than almost anything else. Before bread is cut, before ale is drawn, before the first sleepy face appears in the hall, asking what can be had. Heat must be coaxed back into the room. You kneel. You rake aside the ash with a practiced hand and find the glow beneath. Still alive. That is a small mercy. Fuel costs money, and a banked fire saved from the night is better than starting from black cold. You lay on kindling, then thicker wood. If charcoal is at hand, it is used carefully. Smoke begins at once, uncertain at first, then steady. It climbs poorly before it climbs well. Medieval hearths do not always carry smoke neatly away. Much depends on the building, on the opening above, on the wind, on the day itself. The first breath of morning is often a smoky one. As the flame gathers, the room slowly takes shape. Bench, trestle table, cask in shadow, ladle hanging by the wall, cup stacked with cup, storage chest. The ordinary tools of hospitality are not fine things. They are useful things. Wooden vessels, iron hooks, knives, buckets, a board scarred by work, a table polished only by elbows. You feed the fire and begin to move through the common room while the house is still half asleep. Rushes are stirred and swept. Spilled ash is pushed away from the hearth. A heel of bread hardened overnight is picked up from under a bench. A cup left unreturned is set aside. The room must look respectable or near enough to respectable by the time daylight reaches the door. Respectable does not mean clean in any modern sense. It means managed. It means no pot left where someone will trip over it. It means no obvious foulness at the threshold. It means the benches are upright, the table is set straight, and the smell of yesterday is not stronger than the smell of today. The inn sign outside will begin to matter soon. Many customers know a place by its sign as much as by its name. A painted beast, a crown, a swan, a bell, a spread eagle, whatever hangs above the street or yard entrance, creaking lightly when the wind touches it. But before any traveller sees that sign this morning, the inside must be worth entering. You listen for the bells, not a clock face, not numbered minutes. The rhythm of the town comes more softly than that. A bell from the church, a familiar sound, time enough to know what kind of morning it is, though not the exact measure of it. The bells shape labour. They tell you whether you are early or late in the old, broad way that most days require. In another part of the house, someone else is stirring. Innkeeping is family labour as often as not. A spouse, a daughter, a son old enough to carry water, a servant who sleeps lightly and rises grudgingly. In many houses the work is shared because it must be shared. Brewing, cooking, making beds, opening doors, carrying wood, counting cups, taking coin, rubbing down horses. No one keeps an inn alone for long. The air warms by one small degree. Enough to take the bite from your fingers. You set a pot near the fire. Water will be needed. Always more water than seems reasonable. For pottage, for washing vessels, for guests who ask, for animals, for brewing work on another day. Buckets travel as often as words in a place like this, and beneath all of it sits the dull weight of trade. Ale in the cask must be sound. Bread must be worth serving. Measures and prices live under the eye of custom, and sometimes under the eye of officials. The assize of bread and ale gives towns a way to judge sellers. Ale conners may inspect quality and price. It is not a grand fear every waking moment, but it is part of the work. A poor cask is not only a loss, it can become an offence. So before dawn has fully lifted, you are already keeping many small things from going wrong. Fire from dying, floor from worsening, stock from spoiling, reputation from slipping. The day does not arrive all at once. It seeps in, through smoke, through cold boards, through the first faint sound of someone waking upstairs or in the loft. And by the time the darkness at the window turns from black to blue, the inn has begun, slowly, to become itself again. By the time morning properly enters the yard, the work has already spread beyond the fire. You step outside with a bucket in each hand. The air is colder here, cleaner for one breath, then not cleaner at all. The inn yard has its own smell, and it is stronger in the morning. Wet earth, hay, leather, horse sweat dried into harness, old dung, damp timber. If rain fell in the night, everything has swelled a little. The gate, the cartwheel by the wall, the stable door that always drags at the bottom. This yard is as much the inn as the hall inside. Travellers do not only need a bench and ale, they need room to turn a cart, a place to unload a pack horse, water for animals, hay, oats if they can pay for oats, shelter from weather, somewhere to leave tack, somewhere to tie worry down for a few hours. You cross to the stable and lift the latch. Inside, the warmth is heavier than in the house, but it is not a pleasant warmth. It comes alive with animal breath. Horses turn their heads when you enter. One stamps, one noses at the empty manger. One has already tangled itself lightly in impatience and must be soothed before the day grows foolish. Horses eat money. They eat time as well. Any inn that takes travellers seriously must spend labour on animals, because an unsheltered horse means an unsatisfied guest, and an unsatisfied guest may choose another house on the next road. You begin with water, then hay, then a measured thought about oats. Fodder cannot simply be handed out with a generous feeling. It must be counted, Stable work consumes profit as quietly as firewood does. Hay is bulk. Oats are value. Water is labor. If many beasts arrive at once, all three vanish faster than seems fair. You lift, pour, drag, fork, and spread. Your shoulders are awake now. Your hands are fully awake. There may be an ostler in a larger or busier house, someone whose work leans toward the horses and yard, but in many inns the tasks mix together. The same pair of hands that serves ale may also carry dung. The same voice that settles a bed for a traveller may also judge whether a mare needs rubbing down before feed. Work here does not sort itself into clean little boxes. When the first animals are tended, you look over what came in late the evening before. Harness hanging to dry, a pack saddle set against the wall, a muddied cloak forgotten on a peg, perhaps a merchant's bundle locked away for safety, or sacks stacked where rats cannot so easily reach them. Inns can offer storage and watching as much as lodging, especially in a market town where people pass through with goods, letters, and worry. Back in the hall, the smell of the hearth has thickened into something useful. A pot trembles gently. Breakfast does not need to impress anyone. It needs to exist. Bread, cheese, pottage reheated from yesterday's making. Maybe onions, maybe eggs if they are at hand. Ale drawn in the morning because ale is ordinary drink, safer in many cases than trusting every water source, and common enough to stand beside nearly every meal. You cut bread on a scarred board. The knife moves through crust with a dry sound. Someone stirs the pot. Someone sets out cups. Someone wipes a table with a cloth that has long ago given up the dream of true cleanliness. Better guests might expect a chamber and finer fare in a rich establishment, but an ordinary house trades in simpler comfort. Warmth, filling food, a place to sit, a place to leave the road for a little while. The first guests begin to descend in stages. A man who slept badly because he shared a bed with another traveller who snores. A messenger anxious to be gone. A carter slower than he intended to be. Two pilgrims with damp hems and quiet manners. Maybe a local neighbour who is not lodging here at all and only wants a morning drink and a word of news. The categories blur: inn, tavern, alehouse. In real life, the names can overlap, and so can the people who use them. You do not greet the morning with grand speeches. You greet it with practical questions. Bread? Ale? Will your horse need another feed? Did you settle last night? Or shall it be added? Are you staying until noon? Have you room for one more bundle in the corner? This is hospitality, but it is also reckoning from the very first hour. Many such dealings run on short credit. Not every coin changes hands at once. A guest may promise payment at departure. A local man may ask to settle after market. A familiar face gets more patience than a strange one. And because not every innkeeper writes every charge in a neat hand, the business of remembering becomes part of the trade. Memory, tallies, spoken witness, perhaps a literate family member, perhaps a simple board marked with notches. Small accounts live by repetition. While bowls are set out and cups are filled, your eye keeps straying to the casks. Ale is central to the house, and ale must be watched. How much remains? Whether the flavour still holds? Whether the measure given is fair? Civic rules do not vanish merely because the morning is busy. If local officers inspect cellars for quality or price, then each ladle and each refill quietly belongs to a wider system of watchfulness. Even when no official is present, the possibility sits in the room with everyone else. Outside, the street has started to move. Hooves on mud. A cart somewhere beyond the gate. Voices carrying from a market direction. Bells again. More people will come, though not all at once. Morning in an inn is not dramatic. It is layered. One task laid over another until your whole attention becomes a woven thing. You carry a bowl, you answer a question, you wipe a spill, you call into the yard, you check the pot, you count cups back in, you note who looks ready to leave and who is likely to linger. The work is repetitive, and the repetition is the work. By now the sun is up, though it may not be warm. Light reaches across the threshold and catches the floating dust. The house no longer belongs to sleepers. It belongs to movement, to chewing, to steam, to damp boots near the door, to the ordinary exchange of food, drink, shelter, and trust. And this is only the morning, which has hardly begun at all. And so the morning, which was all bowls and steam and quick hands, eases into a different kind of busyness. Not faster exactly, just broader. The inn begins to open outward. What was a house full of waking bodies becomes little by little a place where the road enters. The first new voices are often not grand travellers at all. They may be a carter wanting ale before market, a neighbour with news and no great hurry, a messenger asking whether anyone rode in late from the next town, a pilgrim with dust already dried on the hem. Medieval inns, taverns, and alehouses do not always sit in neat little boxes the way later people might wish. The names overlap, their uses overlap. But from your side of the trestle table, that difference matters less than whether there is drink in the cask, bread still fit to cut, and enough room to keep strangers from quarrelling over benches. You draw ale again. Always ale again. In a world where brewing is common and water is not always trusted in the same easy way, drink is not an extra. It is ordinary. It is expected. It is one of the plain foundations of the day. You tip the vessel, listen to the glug from the cask, watch the wet shine rise in the cup, and set it down without flourish. If the ale is sound, nobody praises it much. That is the best outcome. Good ordinary work is often nearly invisible. Still, invisible does not mean unwatched. Anyone who sells ale in late medieval England lives under the long shadow of rules about measure, price, and quality. The assize of bread and ale gives local authorities a way to care about what is being sold, and sometimes to punish what is sold badly. Ale conners or other officers may inspect. Enforcement is not likely to feel the same in every place on every week, but the possibility is enough to live with. So when you draw from the cask, you are not merely serving a drink. You are protecting your name, your custom, and your peace. A sour barrel is not a dramatic disaster. It is something worse. It is tedious loss. It is muttering. It is one guest deciding to try another house next time. It is a few cups left unfinished. It is the quiet spread of disappointment. So your first tasks are not only to feed mouths, but to notice which cask has turned a little flat, which one still carries a fresh, bready smell, which has been drawn low enough to tip and empty soon, which cups are disappearing into corners of the room and must be called back before they become tomorrow's shortage. Meanwhile, the yard insists on itself. If the common room smells of warm drink, damp wool, onions and old smoke, the yard smells of labour stripped bare. Wet earth, hay, horse sweat, leather, manure, wood darkened by weather. There is no clean border between hospitality and stable work. A guest who pays for lodging does not arrive alone in spirit. He may arrive with a horse that eats, drinks, stamps, fouls the straw, and needs rubbing down before the animal chills. A merchant's pack horse may matter as much as the merchant, perhaps more. Goods can be lost, animals can founder, reputation can go lame right along with them. So you step in and out, house to yard, yard to house. The rhythm becomes almost foolish in its repetition. A bucket carried, a halter checked, a measure of oats counted out with more care than generosity. Hay forked down, A saddle lifted free and leaned against the wall. A strap inspected for wear. Water sloshing over your hand in the trough. Then back inside to answer a question about bread. Then out again because a horse is scraping a hoof, and another guest is calling for stable space. For many inns, this animal care is not a side duty. It is part of the trade itself. Fodder costs money. Stable room has value. Watering and feeding take time, and time is always being spent somewhere, whether coin returns for it or not. The road does not deliver customers as tidy, self-contained bundles. It delivers mud, beasts, gear, hunger, gossip, and expectation. Some guests want only enough to carry on. A cup, a mouthful. A place to stand under cover while they ask directions. Others settle in long enough to create a little more weight in the room. They leave dampness under the bench. They ask if there is cheese. They want to know whether the road south is passable after rain. They wonder if there is room for a bed that night. You answer what you can. On many matters, certainty is a luxury. Road conditions change, streams swell. A chamber promised too quickly becomes a problem by dusk. And all the while, small reckonings begin. Not every exchange ends in coin laid neatly on wood. Medieval trade often moves by trust, memory, custom, and delay. Someone drinks now and pays when his load is sold. Someone asks that oats and lodging be reckoned together later. Someone swears he settled the last cup already. In a prosperous house, more may be written down. In a humbler one, or in a house where writing is mixed with memory, the account may live partly in the head, partly in tally marks, partly in the repeated saying aloud of what is owed. Exactly how any one innkeeper keeps such matters can differ. That uncertainty is honest, but the pressure of remembering is not uncertain at all. So this part of the day asks for a certain kind of mind. Not scholarly, not noble, just steady. You remember the rider with the red hood took ale and bread. The two men by the door asked only for drink. The cart horse in the yard needs more water before noon. The loaf near the hearth must be cut first because it is going stale. The bench leg near the wall is loosening again. The room keeps handing you such thoughts, one after another, each one small, each one necessary. By the late morning bells, if there are bells close enough to hear, the inn has changed shape once more. The earliest hurry has worn down. The first cups have gone out. The trough has been filled and used and muddied again. Sunlight, thin as it may be, reaches farther into the yard. The floor bears fresh marks from boots and straw and droplets of ale. Nothing gleams. Nothing is finished. But the place is working, which is its own kind of order. And now, as the first tasks settle behind you, the next plain need rises from the back of the house. Food must be made ready again. By midday, the inn is no longer waking and not yet crowded with the heavier arrivals of evening. It sits in a useful middle state. This is when hunger returns in a quieter, more practical way. Lunch, if we call it that for ease, is rarely a separate little ceremony. It is the continued business of keeping people fed from what can be warmed, cut, ladled, or laid out without waste. The meal may lean on pottage already simmering or reheated from earlier. Bread is sliced with an eye to how much remains for later. Cheese is portioned. Onions are brought out. Eggs, if available, can become something quick. Salted meat or fish may appear in modest amounts when the house can manage it. More elaborate dishes belong to richer settings, richer customers, or better supply. Most of the time the work is not about delight, it is about enough. You move toward the hearth again because the hearth keeps pulling every part of the day back to itself. Fuel is a daily arithmetic. Wood costs, charcoal costs, smoke clings, heat escapes. Yet the fire must keep serving. It warms food, dries edges of damp cloth, softens the room, and tells a paying guest that the house is alive and tended. You stir the pot, skim what needs skimming, shift it where the heat is less fierce. Lift the lid and let the steam wash your face for a moment before setting it back. The smell is plain and filling. Grain, herbs perhaps, onion. Maybe a little animal fat if fortune has allowed it. Nothing delicate, nothing wasted. The inn's tools for this part of the day are not noble things. Ladles worn smooth by use, knives doing too many jobs, wooden bowls, trenchers, cups that never seem to stay where they belong. Benches dragged an inch this way and that way until the room is shaped around whoever happens to be in it. A respectable inn needs many objects simply because people and animals both require vessels, surfaces, handles, hooks, and places to put things down. The labor of running the house is often the labor of putting objects back into service over and over again. So you portion and pass. A bowl to one table, bread to another. More ale, always more ale. Someone wants hot broth if there is any left thin enough to pour. Someone else asks whether there are onions. A traveller with better clothing asks in a tone that suggests he is used to more comfort, but even he must accept what the day and the market provide. Hospitality in a middling inn is not endless choice. It is managed sufficiency. At the same time, midday is often when the business of storage shows itself. Goods that came in with travellers may need a place for a few hours. Saddlebags, bundles, a wrapped parcel that must be kept dry. A merchant may ask to leave something under watch while he goes to market. This too is part of the inn's work in many towns. Not just beds and drink, but temporary keeping, temporary order, temporary trust. Trust is a large part of the trade, though it seldom looks grand. It looks like letting a stranger's pack rest against your wall. It looks like believing a man will return for the meal he asked you to hold aside. It looks like remembering whose horse is tied where. It looks like knowing that every borrowed corner of your house has a cost, even when that cost is not counted out until later in the day. And because this is a family business in so many cases, the noon labour is rarely carried by one pair of hands alone. A spouse may be brewing, portioning, or watching the room. A child old enough to be useful may fetch, carry, or collect cups. A servant or helper may go between stable and hearth. Women are well attested in brewing and victualling work, and in some houses the smooth running of the inn may depend less on the name outsiders use for the household head than on the practical skill of whoever keeps the fire fed, the drink sound, and the accounts from drifting into fog. From where you stand, these distinctions are not arguments. They are footsteps, a hand appearing to take a bowl, another hand setting down kindling, someone passing behind you with bread, someone calling from the yard that a horse has kicked loose part of its tether. Domestic space and public space keep folding into each other. Your home is open. Your workplace is intimate. The smoke from your own fire settles on guest and household alike. There is a lull in some places around this hour, though not everywhere and not every day. A market town can keep moving. A fair day can disturb every ordinary rhythm. But even on a quieter noon, stillness is not the right word. What arrives instead is a lower hum, chewing, murmured talk, a ladle scraping the side of the pot, a bench creaking, hooves shifting outside, the scrape of a knife on crust, the brief silence of people attending to their food. You may use these moments to look at what remains. How much bread? How much ale in this cask and the next? Whether more water must be hauled soon? Whether bedding in an upper room can be aired later if the weather stays kind? Whether rushes near the entrance need stirring or changing? Historians can say rushes and straw were used on floors in many places, but exactly how often they were replaced in an ordinary inn depends on means, season, and traffic. That uncertainty sits well with the rest of the house. Nearly everything here depends on condition: weather, coin, where. And then there is the matter of status. An innkeeper may be neither poor in the simplest sense nor secure in the comfortable one. Money passes through your hands, yes. So do supplies, credit promises, and obligations. You must have enough visible stock to seem dependable. Enough cups, enough bedding, enough fodder, enough bread to avoid embarrassment. Yet each of those things can spoil, break, vanish, or be consumed before the next purchase is easily made. Middling prosperity is still vulnerability with a cleaner apron. By the time the meal thins out, bowls need scraping, cups need gathering, and the floor has acquired fresh crumbs, drips, and muddy prints. The pottage pot is lighter. The breadboard is marked by the knife. The room smells thicker now, fuller with broth and breath and warm ale. Outside, the day has turned past its centre almost without notice. Noon does not declare itself for long. It simply passes through the house and leaves more work behind it. So you clear, rinse what can be rinsed, set aside what must be saved, and begin to feel the next part of the day pressing softly at the door, along with all its ordinary little troubles. The troubles of the afternoon do not arrive as grand troubles. They come in little plain forms. A bucket leaks at the seam and leaves a dark trail from well to kitchen. One loaf has baked harder on one side than the other, so the slices look meaner than you would like. A servant says the hay loft is running lower than expected. A carter swears he paid for oats in the morning, and for a moment you cannot tell whether he did, or only spoke as if he had. This is how most difficulty enters the inn. Not like thunder, more like dripping water. You step back into the yard with the rinsing cold still on your hands. The ground is more churned now. Hoof marks overlap with wheel ruts, and the wet patches near the trough have become a thin, dark paste underfoot. A horse stamps in the stable and knocks wood against wood with a dull, patient sound. Another animal noses an empty manger as if hoping grain will appear by wishing. So you count again. Hay first, then oats, then the places left under cover. So much of the house depends on counting. Not fine counting with rows of neat figures, though some larger or better kept inns may have done more of that. Here, and in many houses like it, the reckoning may be simpler. A memory repeated often enough to hold. A few marks cut into wood, coins pushed into little groups on a board or table. A spoken agreement made in front of other ears. Historians cannot always say exactly how one ordinary innkeeper in one ordinary town kept each small account. But they can say that credit was common, memory mattered, and mistakes had a way of becoming arguments by evening. You run your hand over the rim of a cask before drawing more ale. The wood is cool. The peg comes free with a small, sticky pull. The smell rises at once, sour-sweet, bready, alive in its own modest way. Ale is daily drink here, plain and necessary, and because it is necessary, it is watched. Bread and ale are not only food. They are things the town expects to be sold in a fair measure and in tolerable condition. Somewhere beyond the inn, local custom and assize still exist, whether or not an officer stands at the door this hour. Ale-conners do not need to appear every day to live in your thoughts. The rule sits in the mind even when the room is empty. You taste a little from the ladle, not for pleasure, for certainty. It is not fine drink, it is not meant to be. But it must not be spoiled, not sharply sour, not weak enough to shame the cup. If one cask has turned, then the loss is not only the liquid, it is trust. It is the muttering of neighbours. It is the look from a traveller who decides to stable elsewhere next time. Repute clings to an inn almost as stubbornly as smoke clings to wool. Inside, The common room asks for mending in its own quiet language. A bench rocks because the floor beneath it is uneven with packed dirt and old scatterings of rushes. The rushes themselves are flattened where boots have worried them all day. In some places they are changed often enough to matter. In poorer or busier places, perhaps less often than anyone later would wish to imagine. The exact rhythm is uncertain, but the need is not. What is walked on all day must someday be swept away. So you gather what can be gathered. Dust, straw, onion skins, a dropped crust, a twist of wool from somebody's cloak. You sweep in slow arcs that raise almost no dignity at all, only a tired smell from the floor. It is one of the least romantic parts of the work, which is perhaps why it belongs so closely to the truth. Hospitality is not a shining hall. It is the hand that notices a dirty corner and tends to it before supper. Then there is the matter of space. Space is always narrower than it looked in the morning. A merchant's bundle sits where a stool should be. 2 damp cloaks claim the best warmth near the fire. Bedding that seemed enough at dawn now appears thin, especially if more travellers arrive before dark. In ordinary inns, guests often share sleeping places. Privacy is limited. A better room, if one exists, goes to those with status, coin, or urgency enough to ask. The rest must fit as bodies fit in a working world, side by side with blankets pulled where they can be pulled. You climb the short stair to look over the chambers and loft space with the eye of someone measuring not comfort, but possibility. One pallet needs fresh straw. Another needs only shaking out and turning. A blanket hangs over a rail to air. A shutter stands partly open to let in a stripe of pale day and a little moving air. If the weather keeps fair for another hour, that helps. If not, damp settles back into cloth and mattress as though it has a right there. From below comes the sound of a voice asking for more drink. Then another asking whether a horse can be taken in if he arrives by dusk with 2 companions. Already the later day begins to lean toward evening. You answer as best you can, which often means not with certainty but with a practical maybe. If there is room. If the road does not suddenly send 6 more men at once. If one guest departs, if another accepts the loft. Running an inn is sometimes less like declaring and more like adjusting. By the time the floor is swept as well as it will be, the casks checked, the fodder counted, the worst of the small confusions eased, nothing is truly solved forever. That is not the kind of work this is. The bucket may still leak tomorrow. The bench will still wobble. Someone will still remember a payment differently from the way you remember it. But for this hour, the house holds together. The barrels stand. The animals are fed enough. The room can receive the next pair of boots. And that small, imperfect steadiness is the closest thing the afternoon gives to peace. As the afternoon thins, you feel the season inside the work, even before you look directly at the sky. In a warm season, the yard dries faster, the bedding airs more willingly, and the road sends travellers in a steadier mood. But when the colder part of the year presses in, the whole inn tightens around it. Light shortens. Wood disappears faster into the hearth. Damp refuses to leave cloth. Horses need more fodder. People come indoors carrying weather with them. Even now, if the day is autumnal or near winter, the chill returns earlier than it should. It creeps first along the threshold stones and under the door. Then it settles in the corners of the room where the fire cannot quite reach. The benches nearest the hearth are claimed early. A cup of ale looks less like refreshment than like warmth one can hold. Wet cloaks begin to steam gently if they are lucky enough to hang near the blaze. If not, they simply remain wet and heavy. For an innkeeper, winter is not just a view of bare trees. It is arithmetic, more straw, more fuel, more patience, less certainty about arrivals. Roads in medieval England change with the weather more than many modern roads do. Rain can turn them to stubborn mud. Frost can harden ruts into rough ridges. Streams may swell. Darkness comes before the slow traveller is ready. All this means a guest may arrive later, colder and more in need than expected, or may fail to arrive at all after food has been set aside and stable space kept waiting. You keep a part of your mind on the road beyond sight, not romantically, not with longing, only with calculation. If the weather worsens, there may be a cluster of arrivals all at once, people who hoped to reach another town and did not. Then every ordinary supply is tested. How much pottage remains? How thin the ale can be drawn without becoming poor? Whether there is enough hay for one more horse, then another, then perhaps 2 pack animals besides. In a smaller house, this pressure must have felt immediate and close. In a larger inn, there may be more room, but also more mouths and more expectations. The cold enlarges every need. You go to the hearth and break up the fuel with the practiced motion of someone who knows fire as expense as much as comfort. Wood and charcoal do not leap from the ground into your keeping. They are bought, gathered, bargained for, carried, stored dry if possible, and then consumed in front of your eyes. Smoke drifts upward, and not always obediently. Medieval hearths warm unevenly. Some inns have arrangements better than others, but none can command heat as neatly as later centuries will imagine. Warmth lives close to the flames and fades quickly beyond them, so the house arranges itself around warm patches. Bowls are carried nearer the fire. Hands stretch over embers. A child sent on some errand lingers one moment too long beside the glow before being turned back to work. The cat, if there is one, understands the best place in the room better than any human instruction. In winter, the inn becomes less a broad, open business than a cluster of breathing bodies negotiating with cold. The stable changes too. Summer flies are gone or fewer, but comfort does not increase by much. You smell hay, dung, leather, wet hide, and that deep, warm animal breath that mists in the air when the evening cools. Horses need rubbing down after bad roads. Harness must be checked for stiffness. Water must not be neglected simply because it is unpleasant to carry. An animal that stands hungry or chilled is not only a pity, it is a complaint waiting to happen, and perhaps a loss if a traveller decides your house is careless. You lay a hand along a horse's neck and feel the heat there, stronger than the air around you. The beast shifts, chews, and settles. This labour is plain, but it has weight in the business. Many guests come with animals, and in some hours the stable matters as much as the hall. A traveller may forgive a plain supper sooner than poor care for a horse. In that sense, part of your trade is not human hospitality at all, but the management of hay, water, manure, and shelter. Winter also changes sound. Doors close harder. Wind presses in the cracks and gives the shutters a faint, restless speech. Bells from the church can seem sharper in cold air, measuring the day as daylight shrinks. For many people, those bells mark time more reliably than any clock face. The house responds almost without thinking. Fires stirred, pot lifted, candles saved until truly needed. Work hurried a little, though never enough to become graceful. And candles matter more now. In longer darkness, every scrap of light costs something. Ordinary light is often tallow, not fine wax. It smokes. It smells faintly of fat. It gives enough to see a cup, a hand, a notch on a board, but not enough to make the room clear at its edges. So winter threatens not only comfort, but vision. Accounts are harder in dim light. Mending is harder. Finding a dropped coin in straw is nearly impossible unless luck places it near your foot. You think ahead to bedding. Blankets must be shaken. Straw mattresses checked for damp. Shared beds become less a custom of economy alone and more a rough fact of staying warm where privacy is scarce. The arrangement is ordinary, if not always pleasant. A traveller seeking solitude in such a place seeks too much. What the inn offers in the colder months is simpler than comfort and more valuable. A roof, a fire, some food, a little ale, dry straw if fortune allows, a wall between the body and the wind. This is why winter presses on every part of the day even before sunset has come. It alters cost, effort, smell, sound, patience, and sleep. It makes the inn feel smaller and the world outside feel longer. Yet the work does not change into something dramatic. It only grows heavier in the same familiar places. One more armful of wood, one more bucket, one more blanket turned, one more look down the road before dark. And as the season settles itself around the house, you go on preparing quietly for the evening crowd, knowing the cold will come in with them and stay after they are fed. By the time the pale winter light begins to thin toward evening, another kind of weight comes into the room. It is not carried in on boots. It does not steam by the fire. It does not stamp in the stable. It arrives quietly, as numbers do. You feel it whenever a cup is filled too generously, whenever a guest asks to pay later, whenever a cask runs lower than it should. The inn does not live on warmth alone. It lives on rent, on grain prices, on fuel bought dear in cold weather, on repairs that cannot be delayed forever, and on dues that do not care whether the road has been muddy or trade has been thin. So, in this dim part of the day, while the house is between one burst of labour and the next, you turn toward reckoning. Perhaps there is writing in this house, perhaps only a little. In some inns, a keeper or a member of the household can set figures down with ink. In others, memory does more of the work, helped by tally marks, by spoken repetition, by the habit of sorting one debt from another. The exact practice changes from place to place, but the burden itself is certain. A house like this must remember what is owed. You bring out the board darkened by smoke, or a scrap of wax tablet, or simply the steady order in your own mind. One guest for supper and bed, another for ale only. One cartman with 2 animals to feed. A local man who says he will settle on market day. A traveller who pays in coin now, which is always a relief, though never as much of one as it ought to be. The coins themselves are not many. Small silver, worn edges, a little stack that looks thinner than the day felt. You move them with the careful fingertips of someone who already knows where most of them must go next. Some must become more oats, some more saltfish, if any can be had, some wood, some rent, some payment on an old obligation that has sat too long already. And above all this hangs the wider knowledge that towns and lords, officers and collectors all have their own claim on a working house. Medieval innkeeping is not usually wrapped inside one neat guild rule that explains everything. More often it sits beneath layers of civic custom, brewing control, local expectation, property rights, rents, and taxes. If you keep drink, if you host strangers, if you earn visibly, someone always knows the house is here. The old assizes still cast their long shadow over bread and ale. Price and quality are not left entirely to whim. Grain grows dear and the lawful measure shifts with it. Ale conners or other officers may inspect what is sold. Perhaps not every week, perhaps not with the same sharpness in every place. But the possibility is enough to live with. Weak ale, short measure, or overcharging can become more than a private complaint. They can become a public trouble. So taxes in your day are never only the moment of handing coin to an official. They are present much earlier in the way you think about every ladle and loaf. They live in caution. They live in the little pause before promising credit. They live in the choice to water no horse beyond what can be managed, to waste no candle while counting, to scrape the pot well before setting it aside. There are also the larger levies that drift over ordinary people like bad weather. Poll taxes in later medieval England, lay assessments, rents due to a landlord, parish collections, fees and payments that arrive with dates of their own. An innkeeper may seem comfortably placed from the street. There is always motion at the door. There are casks in the storeroom. There is hay in the loft and a sign above the lane. But this can be a misleading sort of prosperity. Much passes through your hands without staying there. If the harvest has been poor, bread costs more. If roads are bad, fewer paying travellers arrive. If a horse falls lame in your yard, fodder is eaten while the owner delays. If servants are needed, wages have their own pressure, especially in the long years after plague changed the labour market and made dependable help harder to command cheaply. Even in a house busy with voices, money can move like water through cracked wood. So you count slowly. You count not only what came in, but what has already gone out in wear. A bent hinge, a bucket hoop, a torn blanket edge, rushes underfoot that need changing sooner in wet weather. Though how often a middling inn truly renews them depends on wealth and traffic and what can be spared. A candle guttering beside your hand is also part of the account. Light itself costs. Someone asks from across the room whether there is still room for one more man at supper. You answer yes, because of course you do. Business is business. Yet behind the simple word is another quiet measure. One more bowl, one more place by the heat, one more memory to carry until the night is settled. This is what taxes and dues feel like in practice. Not ceremony, not a dramatic knock at the door, just the constant narrowing between need and supply. Just the knowledge that the house must appear open-handed while never forgetting its own hunger. At last the tally is put away, or the numbers are folded back into memory for later. The board returns to its hook. The coins return to their pouch or chest. Outside, the light is fading into that grey-blue hour when the road either delivers more guests or gives them up to some other fire farther off. Inside, the room needs you again for things more immediate than reckoning. Supper must be served, benches must hold, and what cannot be solved by counting will now be carried into the evening with the rest. Before the room grows too loud with evening bowls and damp cloaks, the bells carry across the town. They do not stop the work. Nothing so useful happens, but they pass over it, and for a moment they gather the day into a shape larger than the inn. Sound travels above roofs, above stable muck, above the kitchen steam and horse breath. You hear it while your hands are busy. Everyone does. This is how time often feels in a medieval town. Not by the face of a clock for every person, but by bells, by light, by custom, by the knowing of when decent folk should be at market, at mass, at supper, at home. The inn lives inside that rhythm even when it cannot fully obey it. Some days, if trade and labour permit, you may go into the church itself. Some days another member of the household goes while you remain behind the door, tied to the hearth, the casks and the animals. A working inn is a public house in more than one sense. It is seen. It is judged. The way it keeps feast days, the way it closes or quiets itself when expected, the way it receives travellers without inviting scandal, all this matters. So even when you do not kneel in the nave at this hour, the church is still present in the room. A small cross scratched on a beam, a muttered blessing over bread, a candle set before an image on a feast day if the household can spare it. The habit of saying God's will when weather ruins a journey or a guest falls ill. The hope that a traveller is honest because he swears by a saint. the fear that he is not, and that the oath costs him little. Faith and trade sit close together here, not because the arrangement is tidy, but because both belong to daily life. You know too that hospitality itself has a moral edge. Medieval England does not depend on inns alone. Monasteries, hospitals, private households, and other places can shelter travellers as well. Still, when strangers come to your threshold, there is an old expectation that they not be left wholly without aid if aid can be given. Commerce changes that duty, but does not erase it. A bed costs money. Ale costs money. Fodder certainly costs money. Yet hard refusal in bitter weather has its own moral weight. This does not make the inn a place of saintly gentleness. Far from it. People argue over payment. Drink loosens manners. Fatigue shortens temper. But the bells remind you, as they remind everyone, that the day is not measured only in profit and hunger. Perhaps you think of the parish dues still to be met. Perhaps of candles owed for a feast. Perhaps of prayers for the dead in your own family, or of the simple fear of sickness moving through town. Perhaps of confession. Perhaps only of how good it would feel to sit still for a little while in cleaner air than this. Medieval devotion is not always lofty. Very often it is tired. Inns stand in an uneasy place in the moral imagination. They are useful, necessary, often, but also watched. Strangers gather there, drink is sold there, news, rumour, cards, dice, bargains, quarrels, and sleeping bodies under one roof make officials wary and neighbours observant. Respectability must be maintained in plain sight. A reputable house is worth more than a loud one. A decent name keeps custom coming back. So the sound of bells can sharpen your attention to order. Cups are set more neatly. Voices are checked, if only for a moment. A servant is told not to waste the better loaf on those who will not notice. Someone is sent to look at the stable latch again. The house composes itself. Not perfectly, never perfectly, but enough. If this is a feast season, the church touches business in still other ways. More travellers may be on the road for holy days or pilgrimage. Better food may be hoped for if money allows. Fasting days alter what can be served. Fish may be wanted where meat would usually do, and what the church calendar asks of the soul also asks something of the kitchen. Religious time enters the pot as plainly as it enters prayer. You hear the last fading of the bells, then the smaller sounds return to full size. A stool leg on the floor, a horse shifting in straw, a cough near the door, a child in the household being hushed, the scrape of a ladle along the bottom of the pot. For a moment, you let your breath fall in with that fading sound. Not because peace has arrived. Peace is too large a word for this kind of evening. But there is a brief steadiness in being reminded that the whole town has heard the same bell. Bakers, smiths, widows, servants, priests, carters, all of them passing through their own narrow duties at the same hour. Then the inn closes around you again in its familiar way. The fire asks feeding. The guests ask serving. The stable asks checking before the dark grows complete. Religion does not remove you from the world. It sets a frame around it. And within that frame, with smoke in the rafters and winter near the door, you go back to your work. A bowl here, a cup there. A word soft enough to calm one table. A look stern enough to quiet another. The bells have rung. Evening has properly begun. And the house, still half home and half business, turns with you into the next small labour. The house does not grow quieter when the working day turns toward night. It only changes the kind of work it asks from each pair of hands. The room is still public. The fire is still for guests as much as for you. And yet, beneath all that traffic, the inn keeps showing its other shape. It is a household. You feel that truth in the way tasks pass from one person to another without much speaking. A bowl is emptied and someone takes it. A bench wobbles and someone steadies it with a folded scrap of wood. A guest asks for more ale, and a younger hand carries the cup, careful not to spill along the rush-strewn floor. A horse stamps in the stable, and someone listening from the door knows from the sound whether it wants water, hay, or only company. The inn works because no labour stays single for long. In a late medieval English inn, this is often family labour. Husband, wife, children old enough to carry and sweep, servants if the house can afford them, hired help when trade is good enough, and labour can be found. The records do not always let you hear every voice clearly. Sometimes the house is named under one person, often a man. But women are well attested in brewing and victualling trades, and in practice a working house may lean just as heavily on a wife's memory, judgment, and endurance as on anyone else's. That part is not romance, it is survival. So you move through the evening among people who are not separate from the business. They are the business. One person watches the pot. One cuts bread into smaller pieces than anyone would choose if grain were cheap and guests were few. One carries kindling from the dry corner. One shakes a blanket near the stairs. One checks whether the candle needs trimming. One remembers that the merchant by the wall paid for fodder but not yet for supper. Another remembers the opposite about the man near the fire. Memory itself is divided among the household like another tool. If there are children here, and in many such houses there are, they do not live apart from labour. They learn the house by doing what the house can trust them to do. A small child gathers cups. An older one carries water in a bucket not yet full to the brim, because spilled water is wasted effort on a cold evening. A boy or girl near youth may lead an animal, fetch straw, turn the spit, scrape bowls, run an errand, or stand in the doorway long enough to watch for one more late traveller. Their work is not endless heroism, it is repetition. Lift, carry, wipe, listen, repeat. And still there is family life in the middle of it, though not in the private way a later age might imagine. Someone eats standing. Someone speaks low over the table while slicing onions. Someone has a cough that returns every winter. Someone rubs warmth back into stiff fingers over the hearth before reaching again for a ladle or jug. A tired exchange passes between two adults who already know the cost of oats this week and the shape of tomorrow's weather from the feel of the air at the door. Home talk and work talk are the same talk. Privacy is scarce. The same smoke that curls above the guests settles into your own clothes. The same broth fed to travellers feeds the household if anything remains. The same benches used by strangers in the evening may hold folded linens by night, or a half-mended harness by dawn. If the house has better chambers for wealthier guests, that may create a little distance. But in many ordinary places, domestic and commercial life are braided tightly together. The inn is half home and half open mouth, forever taking in road dust, requests, gossip, wet cloaks and coins. You notice too how affection has to hide inside usefulness. Care is shown through doing. A cup is filled before thirst has to be named. The youngest sleeper is guided away from a draught. A blanket is doubled for an older servant whose joints ache in the cold. A wife or husband catches a mistake in the reckoning before it becomes a quarrel. One pair of eyes meets another across the room when a guest grows too merry, and no explanation is needed. This is not softness in the modern sense, but it is a kind of tenderness, practical and worn smooth by habit. The family also shares the risk. If ale turns sour, all feel it. If the harvest is poor and grain dear, all feel it. If roads are bad and guests stay away, the fire still needs fuel, and the animals still need feed. If a debtor fails to return, the lost money does not vanish from a ledger alone. It thins the next purchase of salt fish. It delays cloth. It shortens candles. It means more mending instead of replacing. In a middling house, respectability can sit very close to worry. Sometimes a servant belongs to the household only by contract and food rather than kin. Even so, the rhythm may feel much the same by night's end. Medieval service often means sleeping where you work, eating what the house eats and sharing its smells, cold corners and little rules. The line between family member and servant can remain sharp in law and authority, yet daily life presses everyone into the same practical orbit. All are listening for the same knock. All are waiting for the same room to empty so bedding can be laid out. So, as evening settles deeper, you do not step away from work and return to family. You remain inside both at once. The inn keeps asking. A guest wants hot water. A horse shifts in the stall. A child nods where they stand and is sent upstairs before they drop where they are. Someone laughs too loudly. Someone sweeps around the edges of the room with slow strokes, moving rushes, crumbs, and ash together. And between all these motions, the household holds. That may be the plainest truth of the place. The sign outside may bring strangers to the door. The casks, beds, and stable make trade possible. But the thing that keeps the inn alive from one day to the next is this close web of shared memory and repeated labour. Not grand management, not fine hospitality. Just familiar people doing small necessary things in the same smoky light. And, little by little, as bowls empty and voices lower, the work begins to lean towards sleep. By the time true night settles over the street, the house has thinned, but not gone still. An inn rarely becomes silent all at once. It loosens gradually. One table empties, another lingers. Coins change hands in the last dim light. A guest asks where to lie. Another asks whether the horse has been rubbed down. Someone near the fire delays standing because the cold beyond the hearth already feels real. You answer, point, lift, bank, close, and listen. Now the sleeping part of the business begins. And like everything else here, it is less grand than later imagination prefers. In an ordinary inn, privacy is limited. Shared beds are common. A traveller may pay not for solitude, but only for a place under cover, some straw or mattress stuffing, a blanket if the house has one to spare, and protection from weather and theft, better than the roadside offers. Better houses may have separate chambers for wealthier guests. Poorer or busier ones may crowd bodies closer together. Exact arrangements vary, and historians cannot fix every local custom. But the broad truth is plain enough. Night lodging is practical before it is comfortable. So you go over sleeping places with the same quiet arithmetic used for bread and fodder. Who paid for a better chamber? Who must take space in the common loft? Who can share? Who snores so hard he should not be placed beside a light sleeper if complaint can be avoided? Which blanket is driest? Which mattress still smells merely of straw and old wool, rather than of the damp day just past? You smooth what can be smoothed. You turn what can be turned. You apologize for what cannot be improved. The bedding itself is ordinary. Straw, flock, rough cloth, wool blankets, perhaps sheets in a better room, though not for everyone. Curtains belong more to wealthier settings. Here, warmth matters more than elegance. Dryness matters more than beauty. If the weather has been wet, then keeping bedding from the worst damp is already a success. You lift one corner, test it with your hand, and decide whether it can serve another night. Medieval comfort is often just the absence of a sharper discomfort. The common room changes shape as sleepers claim it. Benches are pushed, packs are pulled close, Boots are set where they can be found in the dark. A man who argued cheerfully over the price of oats an hour ago now curls under a blanket with no dignity at all. Another crosses himself before lying down. A pilgrim folds a cloak for a pillow. A servant assigned the late watch stretches near enough to the fire to feel the heat, but not so near as to waste fuel or risk a spark. Breath begins to replace talk. Upstairs, if the inn has chambers, the sounds are softer, but not absent. Boards creak. Someone coughs behind a door or curtain. Someone prays in a whisper. A bedrope complains under shifting weight. A jug is set down. In a world without modern quiet, night is made of small noises, accepted rather than conquered. The building settles. The animals below answer with their own steady music. Hoof against wood, chain movement, the wet chew of hay, a brief snort, then stillness. Before you can lie down, the house must be checked one last time. This too is part of sleep. You move from hearth to door to stable in a pattern worn by habit. The fire is banked, not dead, because morning will ask for life from it again. Fuel costs money. Lost heat costs comfort. So the embers are covered carefully, enough to last, not enough to flare wastefully through the night. A candle is pinched or blown out. Another is kept only as long as needed. Tallow light is useful, smoky and expensive in its own small way. At the door, your hand tests the bar. The threshold admits no more guests tonight unless need is sharp enough to wake the whole house. Inns do receive late arrivals, and deep sleep is never guaranteed, but every locked moment is a little claim against disorder. Outside there may be mud stiffening in the cold, a hanging sign creaking faintly, perhaps the last sound of boots in the lane. Inside, the warmth is uneven but earned. Then the stable. Animal care does not stop because people are tired. Horses and pack animals have their own claims on the night. Water, if needed. A last look at the hay. A hand on a neck gone cool after labour. The check is brief, because the dark is cold and because most creatures settle best when left alone. But you listen. An innkeeper learns to hear the difference between restlessness and trouble. Many nights there is nothing to answer, only steam in the dimness and the soft shift of weight in straw. When at last you return indoors, sleep does not arrive as a clean reward. It comes folded inside remaining thought. There is still the memory of unpaid reckoning. There is still tomorrow's bread to think of, tomorrow's ale, tomorrow's fuel, tomorrow's guests if the roads permit. There is still the body itself, sore in the shoulders, smoky in the hair, feet thick with the day. Yet tiredness has a mercy of its own. It lowers the world. Where you sleep depends on the house. In some inns, the keeper's family has its own chamber, narrow and plain. In others, separation is thinner, and business presses close even at rest. Either way, the bed is no palace. Rope support if there is a frame, straw mattress or pallet, wool if fortunate, draught if not. The smell of the day remains in the cloth and timber around you. Smoke, ale, damp wool, hay, onion, horse, tallow. These are not interruptions to the place. They are the place. And still, in the dark, after so much carrying and counting, the familiar discomfort becomes almost gentle. The house is full enough. The fire is safe enough. The animals are quiet enough. The last guest has stopped moving. Somewhere beyond the walls, the road continues under moon or cloud, empty for now of anyone asking more from you. Your hands unclench by degrees. Your breathing finds the slower pace the room has been moving toward all evening. Sleep in a medieval inn is rarely perfect. It can be broken by a knock, a cough, a horse, a child, a dying ember, or the cold itself. But for this small stretch of night, the labour eases its grip. the household lies where it can. The guests dream where they are placed. The building keeps its low sounds around you like another blanket. And before long, without ceremony, you drift down into the brief, dark rest that stands between one ordinary day and the next. Sleep does not hold the whole house for long. Long before the sky is properly pale, you rise again into the same dim room, into the same old smoke caught in the beams, into the same work returning as steadily as cold. There is no sharp beginning. The day does not announce itself. It gathers. A horse shifts in the yard. Someone coughs behind a thin board partition. The ashes in the hearth still carry a little life under their grey skin, and that small buried warmth is enough to start everything once more. You push yourself up from the bed or pallet, still stiff from yesterday. The blanket leaves behind its brief pocket of warmth. The floor gives back the chill at once. In a working inn, morning starts not with thought, but with fuel. If the fire dies entirely, the whole house falls behind. Water takes longer to warm. Pottage takes longer to loosen. Cold guests become cross guests. Damp clothes stay damp, so your hands go first to embers, then to laid kindling, then to the careful adding of larger wood. Fire is not romance here. It is timing. It is expense. It is the difference between a house that feels ready and a house that feels poor. As the first flame catches, the room begins to separate into familiar things. Bench, table, cup, ladle, cask. Rushes flattened under many feet. A forgotten spoon near the wall. A crust left beside a trencher. Nothing is dramatic. Everything is a little worn. This, as much as the sign outside, is what the inn truly is. Objects used past prettiness, but not past use. You listen while the room grows visible. The sounds tell you what must be done before any face asks for it. A restless stamping from the stable means the animals want attention before the people do. A sleeper turning over and settling means there is a little more time indoors. In late medieval England, an innkeeper's trade is never only beds and drink. It is fodder and firewood. It is spilled ale and wet harness. It is the management of bodies that speak and bodies that snort and kick the plank walls with impatience. So before the common room fills with requests, you cross the yard. The dawn is little more than a thinning of darkness. The air has that wet edge that enters sleeves and stays there. The ground underfoot is uneven, a mix of earth, straw, and what the animals left yesterday. Inns stand close to roads, and roads carry mud inward as faithfully as they carry travellers. By the stable door, the smell changes from old smoke to hay, leather, dung, and horse heat. It is not a clean smell, but it is strong and alive and expensive. Every animal under your roof represents both custom and cost. You check water first, then hay, then where it can be spared, oats. A tired horse cannot be hurried along by hope alone. If a rider expects the beast to go on after breakfast, the beast must be rubbed down, fed, and watched. In a larger or better kept house, an ostler might do much of this. In a middling inn, family and helpers often fold into one another's tasks. The hand that carries cups at 1 hour may carry a bucket the next. Harness hangs where it was slung in haste last night. A strap needs straightening. A buckle needs checking. A pack saddle sits with mud drying along its edge. You touch things as much to remember them as to mend them. Which merchant meant to leave at first light? Which traveller said he might stay another day if the road remains bad? Which guest asked for his horse to be brought round early? So much of the business depends on memory, because not every house keeps full, neat records, and not every reckoning lives on parchment. Some accounts are held in the head, some in speech, some in notches, some in trust. Back inside, the household stirs around you in practiced ways. One person reaches for water, another for bread, another for the pot. Medieval inns, taverns, and ale-selling houses overlap in untidy real life, and many are family concerns as much as formal establishments. The work does not divide itself according to tidy modern titles. A spouse may brew, a child may carry wood, a servant may sweep rushes, rinse vessels, and run to the stable all before the sun clears the roofs. You set the room in order again because order is something that must be made every day from the remains of yesterday. Rushes are nudged back into place where they still serve, swept aside where they no longer do. Historians cannot always say exactly how often floor coverings in ordinary inns were changed. That would vary with season, money, and traffic. But the floor, whether boarded or earthen, needs managing. Dirt does not stay politely outside. Neither does moisture. Neither does the memory of last night's crowd. Then the first simple food begins. Bread cut, cheese set out, a pot stirred back to life. Perhaps onions, perhaps eggs if they are to hand and to be spared. Ale drawn from the cask. Ale is ordinary enough to be expected and regulated enough to be watched. The assize of bread and ale and local officers give your trade an edge of inspection even on quiet days. Bad drink, short measure, or overcharging can bring trouble. So the cask is not merely a cask. It is reputation sitting in wood. Soon the sleepers are no longer sleepers, but customers again, though some paid last night and some did not. Faces that looked harmless by firelight may look forgetful by dawn. A man laces his boots slowly, hoping perhaps to pass through the room without being noticed. Another asks for more ale as though his lodging, his supper, his horse's feed and this morning's cup all belong to one soft blur. You let him know, gently and without fuss, that the house remembers. This is how the day begins again. Not fresh, not transformed, simply resumed. The road outside is waiting, the casks are waiting, the animals are waiting. Hunger returns, mud returns, small debts return. And with them you return too, moving through the half-light of the inn as if yesterday never quite ended, only paused for a few hours beside a banked fire. By full morning, the house has found its usual shape again. Not quiet exactly, only layered. The scrape of bench legs under talk, the hollow sound of ladle on pot, hooves in the yard, a door opening and shutting on its own tired hinges. You move among these sounds almost without choosing, because each one suggests the next task. A cup to refill, a question to answer, a stable place to promise or refuse. A face at the threshold measuring the room before stepping in. The threshold matters more than it seems. Many customers know an inn first by its sign, by its doorway, by the look of its yard, by whether beasts appear cared for and whether the common room smells merely used or altogether neglected. In towns, signs help people find a house even if they do not read. A hanging board, a painted beast, a remembered emblem. Yet signs can only invite. The real judgment begins the moment a traveller sees whether there is room to turn, warmth to approach, and someone watching the door with practical attention. This morning brings no noble procession. It rarely does. Instead, there are the usual sorts. A carter with mud crusted high on his wheels. Two men on foot with bundles tied in cloth. A messenger in enough haste to ask first about his horse, and only then about his own meal. Perhaps a pilgrim, though the line between pilgrim and traveller can be thinner in practice than pious stories like to admit. Some seek lodging for the coming night. Some only drink and go. Some want news more than food. But news itself costs time, and time is another stock you cannot quite afford to waste. You look first at what arrives on 4 legs. A guest can stand in a doorway for a while. A horse should not. Stable space is part of the bargain, and on many roads it is half the reason a traveller chooses one house over another. Animal care eats away at profit in hay, oats, straw, labour and patience, but without it, many guests would pass by. So you count places before you answer. Which stall is empty? Which horse is due to leave? Which corner of the yard can take a cart? Which hay can be spared today without making tomorrow harder? A merchant asks the price for lodging, for supper, for fodder, perhaps trying to hear in your answer whether the terms are fixed or flexible. They are both. There are customs. There are usual rates. There is also weather, scarcity, the condition of the road, the standing of the guest, and the amount of pressure already under your roof. Medieval prices were not printed and nailed to the wall. They lived in expectation, local habit, and argument kept just short of open quarrel. Some reckonings still wait from the night before. A man who lacked small coin promised payment after selling goods in the market. Another said his companion would settle for both. This is common enough in a world where short credit oils daily trade. But each promise stretches your own purse. Bread, ale, wood, and oats cannot be paid for entirely with other people's intentions. So when a familiar local asks for drink on trust, you weigh not just his words, but his habits. Does he pay after market? Usually. Does he linger when debt is mentioned? Also, usually. The innkeeper's memory can be as useful as any locked chest. If writing is available in the house, some of this may be set down. If not, or not always, then tally and speech do much of the work. A notch for ale, a mark for bedding, a remembered total for fodder. The smoke-darkened tallyboard imagined by historians is plausible here, though any single object survives without telling the whole method. What is clear is that many small mixed charges had to be kept somehow, and that the keeping itself belonged to the trade as surely as pouring drink. Mid-morning brings a steadier inward flow. A neighbour stops for ale because brewing is common, but not every household's brew is equally good, nor every home equally eager to host company. A traveller asks whether there is room in the loft if no chamber remains below. Shared beds are ordinary enough in many inns, though comforts differ sharply by wealth. A better guest may secure a separate chamber if the house has one. A poorer one may accept a pallet, a loft space, or a place near others under wool blankets that have warmed more than one body. Privacy is limited. Shelter is the true purchase. You answer each request in the language of what the house can actually bear, not what would please best. What is possible? Bread can be cut thinner. Pottage can be stretched with more water and onion. One bench can seat another pair if elbows tuck in. But space for animals, dry bedding, and firewood are harder truths. If the weather has turned bad, every damp cloak asks something from the hearth. Every late departure keeps a bed full longer. Every muddy arrival means more straw, more sweeping, more labour, before noon is even half spent. And still the inn must look composed, not grand, merely competent. Cups within reach, tables upright, door watched. Cask not embarrassingly empty. Hospitality in a medieval inn is a kind of public steadiness. The guest does not need to see all the strain underneath. He only needs to feel that his horse will be watered, his supper will appear in due time, and his coin or promise will be met by someone who remembers exactly what was agreed. Outside, the road continues to send in its ordinary variety. Trade, worship, errands, family visits, hired service, legal business, market business, all of it passes through doors like yours. Inns are only one part of the wider lodging world of medieval England beside monasteries, hospitals, and private households. Yet for those who come here, even briefly, your house becomes the shape of travel itself. A doorway, a fire, a mug, a measure, a place for the horse, and a watchful human memory tying all the parts together. By now, the morning is fully awake. The first round of departures has thinned. The next small wave of callers has begun. The pot needs tending again. Someone in the yard is asking for more water. A bench has to be shifted to make space near the wall. Nothing is resolved for long. The room keeps making new little needs. You meet them one by one in the same plain order as the day settles back into trade. As the middle of the day settles over the house, the work becomes less about greeting and more about keeping many small things from slipping apart. The room is not full in any grand way. It is simply busy. A bench that was empty a little while ago now holds two carters sharing a loaf. A man near the door asks for ale and then stands talking long after he has paid. Another wants fodder first and food after. Someone else is sure he settled his morning cup already, though you remember it differently. This is not quarrel exactly. It is the soft rubbing of trade against memory. You move between hearth, table and doorway with the same steady pace. Bread is cut again, not beautifully, just evenly enough. A heel for one guest, a broader piece for another, smaller slices kept back for the household. The pottage pot is stirred so what has sunk does not scorch. Steam climbs up with the smell of onions and grain, and whatever salt meat has gone into the broth. The scent fills the room for a moment, and then is covered again by wet wool, smoke, leather, and the draught from the open door. Midday food in a place like this is often plain. Bread, cheese, pottage, eggs when there are eggs, salted fish or meat if the supplies and purse allow it. A little more for those who can pay, a little less waste for those who cannot. There is no neat division between kitchen work and trade. The spoon that stirs the pot is tied to the coins on the table. The fire under the meal is tied to the wood stack in the yard. Every ladle served is one more small subtraction from the store you must stretch toward evening. So while others eat, you count without seeming to count. You note how low the cask feels when the ale is drawn. You notice which loaf is nearly gone. You see that one of the buckets has not yet come back from the well. You hear a horse stamping in the stable and know before looking that either the feed is late or a strap is rubbing where it should not. The house speaks in tiny signs all day long. A careful innkeeper learns to hear them before they grow larger. There are records sometimes in some houses, and better writing in better places. But not every reckoning lives first on parchment. Much of it lives in the mouth and ear, in memory, in repeated phrases. One bed, two suppers, ale for last night and this morning, oats for the bay horse, a place in the stable loft for the pack saddle, a promise to pay after market. Medieval trade often runs on such short lines of trust, and an inn stands very close to that kind of trust, because so much passes through it quickly. Travellers come in tired, hungry, and sometimes light on coin. Neighbours ask to settle later. Messengers expect speed more than ceremony. You are not only serving them, you are sorting what can be trusted. Near the wall where the light is a little less harsh, the tallyboard waits within reach. Darkened by smoke, worn by the hand, cut with old notches and newer ones, it is a modest thing. It does not look like authority, yet in a room full of cups and voices, it steadies the day. A notch may stand for ale, another for fodder, another for a bed space promised and used. Historians cannot say that every innkeeper kept accounts in exactly this way, and some houses surely used fuller written records than this. But a mixed world of memory, speech, coin, and tally marks is very plausible. In a place where business moves faster than tidy writing, Simple marks can hold the shape of what is owed. You touch the board now and then, almost without thinking. Not every transaction needs a mark. Some are paid at once. Some belong to people known too well to need cutting into wood. But when the room thickens and the requests begin to overlap, the board keeps the day from blurring entirely. A mug for the messenger, oats for 2 horses, cheese and bread for the man waiting on his brother. Later, when the candles are lit, these little marks may become coin, argument, delay, or nodding agreement. For now, they are only a way to keep noon from dissolving. Beyond the threshold, the yard keeps tugging at your sleeve even when you stand inside. Cartwheels grind in old ruts. A child from the household carries a bundle of straw. Someone shakes out a damp cloth. Water splashes into a trough. Dung must be moved. Hay must be measured. In a working inn, animals are not a side matter. They are one of the central burdens of the trade. A hungry horse cannot be soothed with promises. It needs hay, oats, water, a hand over the coat, and a place to stand that is not too foul. Guests may forgive plain food more readily than they forgive poor care for a valuable beast. So the midday hour stretches in 2 directions at once. One half of you belongs to the common room, where bowls scrape and cups knock softly on wood. The other half belongs to the stable and yard, where feed turns into cost with every forkful. You feel this balance in your shoulders more than in your thoughts. It is the weight of carrying one business that is really several businesses tied together. Lodging, drink, food, memory, fodder, fire. And still the bells, somewhere beyond the close walls of the inn, divide the day more gently than any clock face. You may not stop to listen fully. Even so, the sound reminds you that noon does not stand still. The pot will cool. The road will fill or empty according to weather. Those who linger now may leave by afternoon, and others may come before dark, wanting all the same things once again. For the moment, though, there is only this steady middle hour. Steam on the air, a rough board under your hand, a few coins, a few promises, a few notches keeping company with your memory while the day goes quietly on. By afternoon, the first hunger has passed, and the house exhales a little. Not into silence, never that, but into a thinner kind of labour, the sort that can be forgotten because it looks so ordinary. This is when the inn is held together by maintenance. Not the large repairs people remember, but the small repetitive acts that keep wear from turning into failure. You begin with what is running low. A cask is tested by habit, not ceremony. Tilt, listen. Feel the answer in the weight and sound. Ale is the daily drink in many places, and selling it is not an extra grace set atop the inn's trade. It is one of the roots of the whole business. If the cask is poor, sour, thin, or wrongly measured, the trouble is not only with taste. In medieval England, ale is watched by custom and by law. The assize gives towns a way to judge price and quality. Ale tasters or other officers may appear, perhaps not every day, perhaps not with equal zeal in every place. Still, the possibility is enough to live with. Bad ale can cost money. It can cost standing. And standing, once rubbed thin, is hard to thicken again. So you check what can be checked. The cups, the ladle, the smell from the fresh drawer, the look of the foam, the cask stave, the place where damp might gather. None of this is dramatic, it is watchfulness, the quiet kind. A respectable house is built partly from visible competence. Enough cups, enough benches, enough drink, enough order that a stranger can enter, glance around and decide the place is fit to trust for one night. Then the floor asks for its share. Rushes or straw underfoot help soften the dirt and take some of the damp and dirt brought in by boots. How often they are changed in a middling inn is not perfectly clear to historians. It would vary with season, wealth, and how heavily the house is used. But some kind of floor covering is common enough, and by afternoon, you can see where it has been crushed dark by traffic near the hearth and door. A forked hand tool, or simply your own hands, shifts the worst of it aside. Cleaner material is spread where guests will notice first. Not everywhere, that would waste time and store, just enough to make the room feel cared for. Dust rises lightly. It smells dry for a moment, almost sweet, until the older odors settle back over it. Smoke from the hearth clings to the rafters. Tallow has its own thick note. There is old ale in the boards and damp in the lower wall. The exact smell of such an inn cannot be recovered with certainty, but a mix of smoke, horse, hay, wool, onions, broth, leather, and wet earth is a fair reconstruction. It is the smell of a building doing too many things at once. Bedding, if the weather allows, wants air. This too belongs to afternoon. Mattresses stuffed with straw or flock, blankets, coverlets if the house is fortunate enough to have them, all hold the night inside them. Shared beds are common in ordinary inns. Private sleeping rooms are limited, especially outside the wealthiest establishments. Whatever can be shaken, turned, or aired is taken toward a doorway, loft opening, or patch of better breeze. The work is less about freshness in any modern sense than about dryness, comfort, and keeping foulness from settling too deeply. In wet weather, of course, much less can be done. Then the damp stays where it is, and everyone feels it after dark. Around you, the family business reveals itself again. A spouse may oversee brewing or food. A child may carry smaller vessels, fetch kindling, or mind the door for a moment. A servant may muck the stable or carry bedding. In some houses, women run much of this labor openly. In others, the records hide their work beneath a husband's name. Either way, the inn is rarely the effort of one pair of hands. It is a shared machine made of kin, hired help, memory, and repetition. You stand inside that machine, feeling its little strains. Someone is always needed somewhere else. Afternoon is also when supply and distance begin to touch each other. If market day is near, more bread might be bought. If roads are bad, expected guests may not arrive, and food bought for them may sit too long. If roads are good, the opposite trouble appears. Benches fill. Oats run shorter than hoped. Candles burn faster than planned. A working inn lives under the weather more than a settled house does. Dry roads bring custom. Mud eats profit. Short winter light compresses every arrival toward evening and makes every delay feel more costly. You think too in the background way working people think, about labor itself. Good help is useful and never free. After the great mortality of the last century, wages and service have been argued over in towns and villages alike. Rules may try to hold labor in place. Need keeps moving it. If a servant leaves, the missing pair of hands does not create a philosophical problem. It creates more buckets for someone else to carry before dusk. An innkeeper feels broad economic change, not as theory, but as heavier arms and later sleep. For a little while, the common room is calm enough that you can set vessels back in order. Cups together, knives where they are expected, ladles near the cask, a chest checked, a bench pushed square. The sign outside may creak if the wind changes. A stranger passing in the street sees only the front of the house, and perhaps imagines rest. You know that rest here depends on endless arrangement. Firewood dry enough to catch, bedding dry enough to use, ale fit to pour, hay enough for one more animal, and maybe not two. The daylight has already begun its slow lean toward evening. You feel it before the room fully shows it. The brighter edge at the doorway softens. Shadows gather under benches. Somewhere in the yard, a horse lowers its head into feed at last, the sound steady and plain. This is the quieter side of innkeeping, the side with no flourish at all. Sorting, checking, lifting, airing, spreading, listening. The house is being prepared not for some grand occasion, but for the ordinary pressure that returns every evening with the road. And as you move through these small tasks, the day seems to smooth itself for a moment, as if held together by nothing more than your hands, putting familiar things back in their places. The stillness does not last very long. By late afternoon, the road begins to send people in again, not in a grand rush, but in a patient, uneven trickle that somehow fills the house all the same. One pair of boots at the threshold, then another. A cart in the yard, a horse shaking rain or dust from its mane. A voice calling from outside to ask whether there is space. The day turns inward. Supper draws the scattered parts of the inn back together. You go first to the hearth because most things return to the hearth in the end. The pot has to be looked at again. A skin has formed on the pottage where it sat quiet for a little while, and you stir it down with the ladle. Heat gathers slowly from below. Steam rises again, carrying the smell of onions, herbs, and whatever meat or fat has gone into the broth today. No one expects marvels. That is one small mercy. Most travellers want warmth more than delicacy. Bread that is cut thick enough. A bowl that reaches the hand hot. Ale that is not sour. A place to sit without argument. Benches scrape over the floor. Trestles are shifted. Wooden cups are set out in little rows that never stay tidy for long. The common room, which seemed broad enough in the thinner middle hours, begins to shrink as bodies come in from the road, carrying cold air, damp hems, stable smell, and the patient hunger of people who have been moving since morning. Wet cloaks are hung where they can steam a little, not too near the flame. Boots thud against the threshold to shake off mud. Someone stretches stiff shoulders and sighs without meaning to. You notice, as you always do, that feeding guests is only partly about food. It is also about space. Who sits nearest the fire? Who can be persuaded to move a little farther down the bench? Who wants a better place because they paid earlier, arrived first, or believe themselves slightly grander than the next traveller? Inns in late medieval England vary widely in comfort and size, and terms like inn, tavern, and alehouse do not always fall into neat boxes. But in any of them, this evening compression is familiar. The room is not endless. The hunger is not patient forever. You make order as gently as you can. A man asks first for ale and only then for a bed. Another asks for oats before he asks for supper, because his horse must be settled before his own belly is. That too is ordinary. The business of people and animals stays mixed together. You hear the yard door, the clink of harness, the hollow knock of a bucket set down on boards. Fodder and lodging belong to the same conversation. A traveller who can pay for a corner in the loft may still need enough hay and water for the beast that brought him here. Animal care can swallow money and labour faster than a bowl of pottage ever will. You fill cups from the cask with care. Ale is everyday trade, but it is still watched. The law has long tried to regulate bread and ale by assize, and local officers might inspect quality or measure if they choose. Perhaps no official stands in the room tonight. Still, the habit of watchfulness stays with you. A cask drawn too low tastes different. A batch kept too warm turns. A poor measure offends as quickly as bad flavour. Reputation travels down roads almost as steadily as merchants do. The light begins to change before the room notices. Day sinks out of the doorway. Firelight takes over where it can. Faces turn softer at the edges. Smoke lingers under the rafters. Talk rises and falls in calm, rough bands. Not every traveller speaks. Some only eat. Some rest both hands around a cup as though borrowing heat through the wood. One guest tears bread into the bowl and waits for it to soften. Another saves the crust, perhaps for later, perhaps for the road in the morning. You carry and fetch and turn and count. A bowl here, a spoon there. More bread if there is enough. Less waste if there is not. The labor stays humble. Back and forth between table and hearth, between hearth and cask, between room and yard. The inn is often imagined as a place of cheerful welcome, but much of it is plain repetition. Lift, stir, pour, wipe, listen. Remember who asked first. Remember who has already been served. Remember that one chamber is fuller than another, and that two strangers can be put together if neither is proud and both are tired. Shared sleeping is common enough in ordinary lodging. Private rooms exist in better houses, but many guests must settle for less. A bed may be a frame, or little more than a pallet. A mattress may be stuffed with straw or flock. Blankets are valuable. Sheets belong more often to comfort than necessity. Curtains, if there are any, speak of a richer house than most travellers can expect. So while supper is served, you are already measuring sleep in your mind. Not by dreams, by surfaces, by corners, by wool, straw, and floor space. The family of the house moves through this with practiced ease, though practiced ease is not the same as rest. A child old enough to carry cups without dropping them is useful. A spouse who knows the casks, the fire, the temper of guests, and the state of the bread is more than useful. Servants or hired helpers, where a house can afford them, take up stable work, carrying, bedding, brewing, or kitchen labour. Medieval inns are often family businesses in the plainest sense. Home and trade share one roof, one smoke, one tiredness. Soon the room settles into the simple sounds of eating. Spoons touch bowls. A knife knocks once on wood. Ale is swallowed. Someone coughs after laughing too hard at nothing very grand. There is no feast here, no shining abundance. Only a workaday meal repeated in one form or another across many evenings. Bread, pottage, cheese perhaps, onions, eggs if available, salted fish or meat if the house has some to spare. The richness lies less in the food than in the fact that it is hot and waiting. And as this long, practical hour carries on, you feel the house thicken around you. Fire, steam, breath, wool, leather, hay, damp timber, tallow, horse sweat drifting in whenever the yard door opens. The exact smell of such a room cannot be measured now, only guessed from materials and habits. But the mixture itself is easy to imagine. A working inn is not clean in the modern sense. It is simply in use. Deeply, constantly, thoroughly in use. At last, when the sharpest edge of hunger has been quieted, voices lower a little. Bodies lean back, cups are refilled more slowly. The room does not empty, but it eases. Supper has done its plain work. It has brought you no real stillness, only a softer kind of motion. And under that softer motion, evening continues to gather, asking next for light, for beds, and for the long, small mathematics of the night. When the bowls are mostly emptied and the room has sunk from hunger into drowsier talk, another kind of work begins. It is quieter work, though not easier. The reckonings come out with the candles. An ordinary inn does not glow brightly at night. Light costs money. In a house like this, it is likely tallow more often than wax, and tallow gives a smoky, wavering flame with its own smell. You pinch life from one candle to spare another. You set the light where it can serve both hand and eye. Even then, it barely reaches as far as you want. The board before you is dim. Coins catch and lose the flame. Faces beyond the nearest table become shadow and beard and tired cloth. Now the day must be remembered in pieces. Supper for 2. Ale for 3 rounds. A place near the fire but not a full bed. Oats for 1 horse. Hay for another. Perhaps a little extra bread taken out to the yard. Perhaps a traveller who arrived at noon and swore he would settle at dusk. Perhaps a local man who drinks now and pays after market. Medieval trade often runs on short credit, and an innkeeper lives among promises almost as much as among coins. Some promises are sound, some are wind. The trouble is that both can sound alike in a warm room after dark. You draw the small amounts together the way the day drew people together, not into elegance, into order. If you write, you may set marks by candlelight, slowly, with care for ink and surface. If writing is uncertain, or if speed matters more than neatness, then memory, speech, and tallying can carry much of the burden. Historians cannot always say exactly how one given innkeeper kept accounts. Some surely wrote more than others. Some leaned on spouses or clerks. Some used boards, notches, pegs, and habit. In a busy house, all these methods may have overlapped. So you ask questions in a low voice and hear the same answers again. Did you take ale at midday as well as tonight, or only tonight? Was fodder included with the stable place or counted separate? Are there 2 men to the bedding in that chamber, or 3? Did the messenger already pay for his bread when he came in from the yard? A reckoning is not only arithmetic, it is memory tested in public. A small board or tally helps where perfect writing does not. A notch for a meal, another for ale, a different place for fodder. This is a plausible reconstruction rather than a rule for every house, but it fits the world of mixed literacy and repeated small debts. You can almost feel the smoothness of smoke-darkened wood in the hand, one side worn by fingers. The marks cut quickly, close together, meaningful to the person who made them and, perhaps less so, to anyone else. Not a grand account book, just enough structure to hold the night together. Guests pay in uneven ways. A few place coin down at once, relieved to settle before sleep. The sound is brief and pleasing. Silver, if you are fortunate. More often smaller money, enough to count but not enough to admire. Others negotiate, not angrily, only hopefully. They ask whether the horse can be counted with the morning meal, whether the second cup of ale belongs to the first round, whether sharing a bed lessens the charge. A better sort of innkeeper must be firm without becoming sharp. Too much softness invites loss. Too much hardness empties the room on the next market eve. All through this, the house continues around the reckoning table. Someone near the hearth is yawning openly now. Another guest has fallen silent in that heavy way, which means sleep is already arriving, just before the body stands. In the yard, a horse stamps once and then settles. Upstairs or in the loft, boards give a mild complaint under shifting weight. Beds are being found, blankets are being claimed. A corner near the warm wall becomes suddenly precious. Sleep, like space, has to be portioned out. You keep one ear on the accounts and one on everything else. That divided listening may be the truest skill of the trade. Not cooking alone, not pouring, not smiling at travellers. Listening. To payment, to excuses, to stable sounds, to the flame shortening in the candle cup, to a servant crossing the room with fresh bedding, to weather beginning outside, if weather is coming. A medieval innkeeper lives inside interruption. Even the quiet parts are full of small crossings. There is also the wider weight that never fully enters the room, and yet is present in each little payment. Rent, dues, the possibility of taxes, the cost of fuel, the price of grain, which shapes bread and ale alike under long habits of regulation and custom. A single bowl of pottage may look simple on a trestle table, but behind it stand harvests, purchases, local rules, and all the fragile margins of a middling household. Prosperous enough, perhaps, to handle stock and coin, vulnerable enough to feel every poor season, So when you gather the night's takings, you do not hold wealth. You hold continuation. Tomorrow's oats, tomorrow's firewood, the brewer's next batch, salt, candle grease, repairs to harness leather, maybe rent money set aside if the week has been kind, maybe not. The inn sits in that narrow place between enough and not enough, and your fingers learn the measure of it in metal weight and absent weight, both. One by one, the reckonings thin. Those who have paid drift toward their sleeping places. Those trusted to pay later are fixed in mind, or on wood, or in a few brief marks if a hand in the house can make them. The candle gutters. You straighten the nearest cups. Brush crumbs together with the side of your hand. Turn one coin, then another, then tuck them away. The common room has become larger again without anyone moving the walls. That is what happens when voices lower and benches empty. Soon the last questions are answered as well as they can be answered tonight. No account is ever perfect. Not in this light. Not in this tiredness. Not with strangers who may leave before dawn and neighbors who always mean to settle next time. But perfection is not the aim. The aim is to carry the house safely over one more evening. And so the candle burns down to a stub while the room quiets around it. Supper has passed into reckoning. Reckoning is passing into sleep. You feel the day narrowing toward embers, latched doors, and the softer watch kept after the final bell. You let the last voices thin out on their own. One by one, cups are turned over, benches scrape back, and men who were very sure a moment ago become careful again when they stand. The room does not fall silent all at once. It loosens. A cough near the hearth. A muttered good night. The soft drag of boots across rushes that have already done a full day's work. Then even those sounds begin to spread farther apart. Now the inn becomes a house of corners. Each corner asks for a different sort of attention. One sleeper wants another blanket, or what passes for one. Another wants to know if his horse truly has oats enough. Someone who drank on credit suddenly remembers a small coin after all, and places it on the board as if the act were a favor to you. You take it without ceremony. Coin is coin, whether given proudly or with reluctance. You move first to the fire. That is where night begins to be managed. The bright, open blaze that served supper is too costly to leave unchecked, but too useful to lose entirely. Fuel is money. Heat is money. Cold discomfort is also money because unhappy guests remember a cold inn. So you draw the burning wood inward, nudge embers together, and bank them under ash so that the heart of the fire may live until morning without eating too much of the stack beside the wall. Smoke lifts low for a moment and then settles into the rafters that have been dark for years. In a middling English inn, light this late is poor and expensive. A tallow candle gutters on the table. It gives more smell than grace. Wax belongs more easily to richer rooms and churches. Tallow belongs to houses like this, where every inch of brightness has to justify itself. The flame throws a greasy shine over cups, over the edge of a knife, over the tallyboard worn smooth by handling. It is enough light to finish, but not enough light to make anything easy. You check the door bar, then the shutter, then the latch on the smaller side door that opens toward the yard. This too is part of hospitality. Not smiling, not serving. Simply making sure the house stays shut against wandering dogs, opportunistic hands, weather, and confusion in the dark. In towns and on roads alike, those who keep lodging are expected to keep some sort of order. A house that cannot close itself is a house that will soon gain a bad name. Beyond the door, the yard has not gone fully still. Horses shift even after men stop speaking. A hoof knocks wood. Leather creaks. One animal blows sharply through its nose, impatient with the world for reasons that do not need explaining. Animal care never really ends. Travelers pay for bed and board, but much of an inn's labor belongs to creatures that cannot count the service. Hay, oats, water, rubbing down, secure tying, a glance at a strained strap, a hand over a warm neck to check for trouble. These are ordinary tasks, and they reach deep into the night. You lift the lantern and step into the yard. The air outside feels colder now that the hall has emptied. Damp rises from the ground. There is the smell of manure, wet straw and timber cooling after the day's warmth. The stable is only a deeper dark within the dark. Inside you move slowly so as not to wake more motion than necessary. A pack horse turns an ear. Another lowers its head again over what remains of hay. You run your hand along a flank. Dry enough, no fresh sweat, no sign of panic. Good. A larger inn might have more helpers to divide this labor late into the evening. A smaller one might rely almost entirely on household hands. Either way, the work is shared where it can be shared and carried where it cannot. Family, servant, ostler, spouse, older child. The medieval inn is rarely one person performing a neat trade. It is a house trying to remain useful under pressure. Even now, when the pressure has softened, there are bowls to stack, bedding to settle, and animals to hear. When you return inside, the common room looks broader than it did at supper, though the walls have not changed. This is what quiet does to space. It stretches it. The trestle tables are streaked with the last signs of broth and ale. A ladle has been left in a pot to soak rather than scrubbed tonight. That is acceptable. Not every task belongs to this hour. Medieval work is full of carrying one small, unfinished thing into the next day. The sleeping arrangements ask for their own plain diplomacy. In ordinary inns, privacy is limited. Better houses might offer separate chambers to guests who can pay. Many cannot. Beds are shared. Pallets are laid where there is room. Straw mattresses flock where the house is prosperous enough. Blankets of uneven quality. Sheets if the place is better kept than most. Curtains belong more to wealth than to common travel. What matters here is not comfort in the modern sense. It is shelter, dryness if possible, some softness between bone and board. You listen at the stair. A floorboard answers. Someone turns over overhead. Another sleeper has begun to snore in patient, regular pulls, as if soaring gently through the night. Near the hearth, one servant curls under a coarse blanket within reach of the banked warmth, ready to rise if the fire fails, or a late knock comes. This is sleep arranged around duty, not sleep freely chosen. The bells have long since done most of the town's timekeeping for you. Exact minutes do not matter much here. What matters is before dark, after supper, at the final bell, before dawn. The inn lives by those broader measures. Night is not an empty span between one day and the next. It is another working part of the same long day, only quieter and more watchful. At last there is little left to do but remain available to interruption. That is a task in itself. You sit for a moment on the bench nearest the wall. The candle has shortened. The room smells of tallow, stale ale, damp wool, and the old smoke lodged deep in the beams. Your hands carry the rough memory of cups, latches, straw, coin, and reins. Nothing grand has happened. No one will write about this night. And yet the whole business depends on such nights passing safely, on doors holding, embers lasting, and bodies staying under cover until morning. So you keep still and listen. To the horse in the yard, to the sleeper above, to the weak little sound of the candle feeding on itself. The inn is not asleep, not fully. It is merely breathing more slowly now, and asking you to do the same. Just when the house seems to have found its slower breathing, another sound enters it. Not loud, only a knock. Wood on wood, then a pause, then another, more certain this time. Late arrivals are part of road life. Roads do not end neatly at sunset. Wheels break, streams delay. Mud keeps hold of boots and hooves. A traveller aiming for daylight may still reach your door in darkness, tired, chilled, and hoping the house has not filled past mercy. You wait for a moment before rising, not from drama but from caution. An inn is meant to receive strangers, yet strangers also bring risk, confusion, and extra labour when labour already feels spent. You take the candle, shield it with your hand, and go to the door. The bar lifts with a wooden complaint. Cold air finds the gap at once. Outside stands a small party, plain and weary. Perhaps a carter and one younger helper. Perhaps 2 travellers on foot with a pack animal. The exact mix changes from night to night, and in truth, medieval records often tell us more about the fact of lodging than the faces involved. But the scene itself is easy to imagine from what roads and inns required. Wet hems, a beast needing water. Questions asked in low voices so as not to wake a whole room at once. You look first not at their faces, but at their condition. How many bodies? How many animals? How muddy? How cold? Whether they carry enough coin to be straightforward or the thinner confidence of those who mean to settle later. In a working inn, welcome is always braided together with counting. There is no perfect room waiting. There almost never is at this hour. So you do what innkeepers do. You fit people into the spaces the house still has. A spot near others already sleeping. A place in the loft if it is dry enough. Floor space with straw. If the house were richer or the guests grander, there might be a chamber. More often there is negotiation. Shared arrangements were common enough in ordinary lodging. Privacy, like fine wax candles, belongs more easily to the fortunate. You let them in one by one, careful of the draught. The candle stirs. A smell comes in with them. Road mud, wet wool, horse sweat, cold air. It joins the older smell of the room without changing it very much. This is one of the plain truths of the inn. New people arrive, but the house keeps its own smell. Ale, smoke, rushes, damp timber, onions from the kitchen, and the lingering animal warmth of the yard. The exact balance is a matter of guesswork for historians, but no one doubts the mixture itself. A request for food comes next, naturally enough. At this hour there is no fresh feast to offer. What remains can be warmed or brought as it is. Bread, cheese, a little pottage if the pot still holds enough, and the embers answer kindly. Ale, certainly, if the cask has not been closed too tightly for the night. Medieval inn fare is often ordinary in just this way. Service depends on what the day has left behind. Better supplies mean better welcome. Thin supplies mean apology, or the rough equivalent of apology that busy people make with a shrug and a ladle. While they eat, you reckon quickly. Lodging, ale, feed if the animal stays. Perhaps a little extra for oats, which matter more than many travellers wish to admit when paying. So much of an inn's real burden lies in the mouths of horses. Men complain loudly about their own supper, but an unfed horse repays neglect with delay, weakness, or injury on the road. For merchants and carters especially, animal care is not an add-on to lodging. It is part of the heart of the trade. If there is writing in this house, it may be used now. If not, there is memory, spoken agreement, a tally board, a notch cut later, a peg placed in the right hole, or a family member told quietly to remember the matter by morning. Historians know that many small businesses in medieval England mixed these methods. Full, neat ledgers are not the only way to keep a world in order. A house can run on habit, witness, and repeated phrases. You owe for bed, for ale, for the beast's oats. Yes, and for the bread as well. The late arrival changes the shape of night without truly breaking it. A bench becomes temporary table. A bucket must be lifted again. A stable check that was finished must be half done once more. The servant near the hearth opens one eye, then closes it when no alarm follows. Somewhere above, a sleeper coughs and turns over, but does not wake fully. The house absorbs the new weight and settles around it. This is the quiet skill of innkeeping. Not grandeur, not performance. Adjustment. Small, repeated, practical adjustment. Stretching pottage. Stretching straw. Stretching patience. Stretching the worth of a candle to cover one more exchange. A roadhouse survives by being flexible more often than by being fine. At last, the new guests are placed where they can be placed. Cloaks are hung as near to dryness as space allows. Shoes are set aside, dark with mud. The animal has water and a measure of fodder. The coin, if any has changed hands tonight, is tucked with the others. If no coin has changed hands, then the promise of it joins the many other promises from which tomorrow must somehow be made. You close the door again. Bar down, latch set. The room is fuller now, yet oddly calmer for having finished the disturbance. Outside, the road continues in darkness without your help. Inside, the inn returns to its softer sounds. Breathing, a horse stamping once in the yard. The nearly silent sift of ash as the banked fire settles deeper into itself. There is one last look around. No sparks where they should not be. No wandering hand near the cups. No child half awake and frightened by the strange voices. No pot left in danger of tipping. This is how the day ends in truth. Not with a clean ending, but with enough order gathered from untidy things. You lower yourself again onto the bench or onto a pallet close to the hearth if the house allows even that much comfort. Tiredness now is no longer sharp. It is dull and complete. The kind that covers thought like a blanket covers knees. In a few hours the embers will need coaxing, the animals will stir, and the first grey light will show the rushes, the cups, the sleeping shapes, and the work beginning again. But not yet. For now the inn keeps its final watch, and you remain inside it, surrounded by strangers, family, debts, warmth, smells, wood, straw, and sleep. The whole trade has narrowed to this simple hope that what has been sheltered through the night may still be in order at dawn. At some point in the dark, sleep thins, not all at once. It loosens in layers. A horse shifts in the stable. Someone on a bench turns over and draws in a cold breath. Ash settles softly in the hearth. Then, from farther off, a bell begins the first slow reminder that night is ending whether the house is ready or not. You do not rise with freshness. You rise because a house that sells warmth cannot stay cold for long. The blanket leaves your shoulders. The air feels damp on your face. Under your feet, the floor is chill, even where rushes still lie. They have flattened under yesterday's traffic. They hold bits of straw, ash, and the ordinary dust of an inn that is never fully clean and never fully at rest. The hearth is your first concern. Always the hearth. You kneel near the banked remains of last night and pull back the grey cover of ash. Beneath it, a few red points still breathe. This is a small mercy. If the embers had died completely, more time and more fuel would be needed, and fuel costs money every day of the year. You feed the little red life carefully. Kindling first, then a little larger wood. You blow until your cheeks feel the effort. Smoke comes before flame. It lifts into the dim room and hangs low for a moment, making your eyes prickle. Soon there is enough fire to wake the iron pot. Water must be warmed. Pottage can be revived. Hands can be held toward heat. In a place like this, comfort begins less as comfort than as management. Fire for food, fire for ale if something needs warming, fire for the room, so guests do not grumble that they paid for lodging and rose into cold misery. Around you, the inn begins its quiet untying from sleep. A servant or family member coughs in another part of the house. Someone gathers a cloak. A wooden cup is nudged and rolls a little before stopping against a bench leg. These are not grand sounds. They are the small bones of morning. You take up a broom of twigs and start on the floor nearest the hearth. Sweeping in such a place is never a final act. It is only a daily correction. Bits of crust, rush stems, ashes and tracked mud are coaxed toward the door. If the inn is middling rather than rich, the coverings underfoot may be no more than rushes or straw in places, changed as means and traffic allow. How often exactly they are replaced in houses like this is harder for historians to pin down. It likely varies with season, purse, and the number of boots that crossed the room the day before. But this much is plain enough. Under many feet, everything soon goes flat and tired. The benches are set right. A trestle is shifted back into place. A ladle is found where it was left to dry. Cups are turned upright. One candle stub from the evening reckoning sits hardened in its own drippings. Tallow always leaves a smell of use behind it. Not sweet, not clean, only familiar. At the door, you lift the bar and open the house to the grey edge of dawn. The air outside is colder than the room. It smells of wet earth, dung, and old rain trapped in timber. The yard waits in its usual state of honest disorder. Cart ruts, patches of trampled straw. A bucket set where it should not be. The sign above the street gives a faint creak. This too is part of trade. A house must be found before it can be chosen. The stable asks for attention before many human mouths do. Travellers may forgive rough bread. Horses forgive very little. You cross the yard with a lantern or the earliest light, depending on the season, and slide into the smell of hay, leather, horse sweat, and manure. It is a heavy smell, but not an alarming one. For an innkeeper, it means the business still has breath in it. A beast stamps. Another turns its head and rattles tack. Water has to be checked. Hay has to be shaken down. If oats are to be measured, they are measured with care, because fodder is one of those quiet expenses that can eat through profit more steadily than any loud disaster. Merchants, messengers, pilgrims, and carters may all remember the warmth of your hall, but they judge the house just as firmly by the state of their animals in the morning. You run a hand along a flank, checking for heat and strain. You look at a hoof. You study a strap that may have rubbed through in the night. Much of medieval hospitality is animal care dressed in human language. A guest asks for a bed, but often pays just as anxiously for stable room, water, hay, oats, and safety for what carries his goods. Back inside, the room has changed a little. Not brighter yet, but less fully dark. A sleeper rises from a shared place and searches for boots. Another wraps a cloak close and reaches toward the fire without speaking. Shared lodging is ordinary here. Private comfort belongs mostly to better houses and better purses. In an ordinary inn, space is stretched, not bestowed. You cut bread. Harder loaves can be softened by broth or ale. Cheese is set out. If there are onions, they are peeled. If there is pottage from the day before, it is stirred back to life in the pot. A better guest may hope for eggs. A poorer one may settle for crust, warmth, and drink. What can be offered depends on market supply, season, and who has paid what already. Soon the first simple service begins. No trumpet announces it, no single moment divides night from day. The house only shifts inch by inch toward labour again. Steam starts to rise. Spoons knock softly against bowls. A guest asks after the road ahead. Another asks if the stream east of town is fordable after rain. These questions matter. Road and weather decide who travels, who delays, and how full your rooms become by the next dusk. You answer as best you can from hearsay, from yesterday's arrivals, from the look of boots and wheels and horse bellies. That is another quiet part of the trade. You sell not just ale and boards, but useful knowledge in scraps. Which bridge is damaged? Which road is deep in mud? Whether the market town ahead is already crowded. Information passes across an inn table almost as naturally as cups do. Morning has not fully opened yet. The sky is only beginning to pale beyond the yard. But the work is already underway, steady and unadorned. The fire has been coaxed, the room has been righted, the animals have been seen to. Bread has been cut. The house, which a few hours ago was only embers, sleeping bodies and muttering beams, is once again becoming what it must be. A place where travel can resume, one plain task at a time. Once the first mouths are fed and the first horses watered, the day does not become easier. It merely becomes more public. Dawn gives shape to things that were only guessed at in the dark. You can see the damp shining on the threshold. You can see which cloak has dried stiff by the fire and which still leaks rain onto the floor. You can see the bowls that need washing, the rushes that need another pass of the broom, and the guest who is searching his purse as if the right coin might appear if he worries at the strings long enough. This is the hour when an inn stops being a shelter and returns to being a business. A man sets down payment for ale and a corner of bedding. Another asks to carry the rest on trust until his return through town. Because so much trade in medieval life runs on short credit, you cannot demand bright silver from every hand at every moment and hope to keep custom. Yet every delay in payment becomes a small weight you carry forward. Memory, speech, simple tallies, and in some houses writing, all have to work together. If a board with notches or peg holes lies near the account place, it is not a grand object. Just wood made useful. Something that can divide oats from ale, lodging from supper, and certainty from confusion. Historians know that not every innkeeper kept accounts in the same way. Some wrote, some had help from a literate family member or clerk. Some relied more heavily on memory and spoken reckoning. In a middling house like this, the exact balance is difficult to prove. Still, the need itself is beyond doubt. Too many small things are sold here for the mind alone to bear them without aid. You watch the guest count. 1 penny for this, another small coin for that, a promise for the rest. It is never only food on the table. It is straw in the loft, wood on the fire, oats in the stable, and space taken by bodies that might otherwise have brought in other payment. Hospitality sounds gentle. Its arithmetic is not. At the cask, another labour waits. Ale does not keep forever, and bad ale damages both custom and standing. In medieval England, cellars lived under the long reach of assizes and local oversight. Price and quality were not merely matters of private taste. They could become matters of civic attention. Ale conners or other local officials might inspect, test, or judge what was sold. Enforcement may not have felt equally sharp in every place or every week, but the risk was real enough that you do not draw from a cask carelessly. You check the level, you lift the lid, you smell for sourness beyond what belongs there. You think about grain prices because rules tying bread and ale to the cost of grain mean that harvests whisper even into the cup. A bad season does not end at the field. It comes indoors. It becomes thinner drink, tighter margins, and customers who complain as if the sky had been your own servant and failed you personally. Still, the cups must be filled. Ordinary ale is part of ordinary life. Many households brew it. Many travelers expect it. It is safer than uncertain water in many settings, nourishing in its way, and central to the little economy of a victualling house. So, the work of drawing, serving, and guarding quality repeats itself with almost no glory at all. The common room wakes by degrees. A carter asks for more bread before the road. A messenger wants haste more than comfort and eats standing. A neighbour from town slips in for drink and talk, not for lodging. This is why the neat distinctions between inn, tavern, and alehouse can blur in practice. Terms overlap, functions overlap. A house may host travellers, sell drink to locals, stable animals, and provide meals all in the same morning. What matters to you is less the label than the labour. You move from board to barrel, from table to door, from hearth to yard and back again. A knife must be wiped, a ladle rinsed, a bench steadied. A dropped crust kicked toward the hearth for later sweeping. There is no single centre to the work, because the whole building is the work. Hall, threshold, stable, loft, buttery, hearthside. Each space pulls at you in turn. Outside, more daylight spreads over the yard. The muck looks no prettier in full light, only more exact. Dung must be forked aside. A cartwheel has left a deeper groove than you liked. Water is carried again because water is always being carried. Buckets rise from well to hand to trough, from trough to earth again by spillage and use. Your shoulders learn this pattern so early and so often that they seem to remember it, even when your thoughts drift elsewhere. If the weather is fair enough, bedding may be shaken and aired for a short while. Blankets hold smells as stubbornly as beams do. Straw mattresses flatten. Shared sleeping arrangements mean that one night's guest leaves traces for the next. Better houses may have more linens, more chambers, more separation between bodies. Here, cleanliness is pursued within limits of means, time, and weather. A child of the household or a younger servant carries a pot too carefully with both hands. Someone else gathers crusts for pigs or scraps for the next pottage. Family business means family motion. Medieval inns are often not enterprises separated cleanly from domestic life. They are homes that sell use of their warmth, food, labour, and floor space. Wives, husbands, children, hired hands, brewers, cooks, and ostlers may all be woven through the same morning. Legal records do not always describe every pair of hands with fairness, especially women's, but the work itself makes their presence plain. Soon a traveller asks whether there will be room again tonight on his return. You answer cautiously. Much depends on weather. Much depends on market traffic. Much depends on whether a string of pack horses appears before dusk, or whether the roads turn bad and keep everyone away. An innkeeper lives close to uncertainty, but not the grand uncertainty of legends. Only the ordinary one. Will the cask last? Will the oats stretch? Will the bench hold? Will the guest come back with coin? The morning bell has long since faded, and yet its order still lingers in the body. Medieval time is often felt more than measured. Not minutes, but sequences. Fire first, water next, bread cut, animals seen, cups filled, coins counted, floor swept again. The day arranges itself by repetition, and repetition makes it bearable. By now, the inn is fully awake. Doors open and close. Boots pass over the threshold. Sun, if there is any, reaches a little way into the room and stops. The smell inside is already becoming the familiar blend of smoke, ale, damp wool, wood, and horse from the yard. It is not pleasant in the refined sense. It is simply the smell of livelihood. And so the house is set in motion once more. Nothing famous happens. No great guest arrives. No splendid feast is laid. There is only this practical morning, this ordinary exchange of warmth for coin, fodder for trust, bread for labour, and shelter for the chance to begin again by by nightfall. In a little while, the earlier departures will be gone down the road, and the next turn of the day will gather quietly around the inn without asking permission. By now, the day has settled into that middling hour when the inn is neither empty nor crowded, and the work turns quieter without becoming lighter. The first departures are long gone along the road. The next arrivals have not yet pressed fully in. What remains is the long, plain business that sits underneath every meal and every bed. Someone owes for oats. Someone says the boy paid for his ale at dawn. Someone promises to return from the market before dusk with the proper coin. And you, standing near the board or table where such things are remembered, must hold all of it in your head with a calm face. This is one of the less visible parts of innkeeping. A traveller may think he is paying for warmth and supper, but you are always measuring trust as well. Coin is welcome because coin is simple. Coin settles a matter. It can be turned toward firewood, barley, salt, a cooper's repair, a little wax if the house can afford it, or rent when rent must be found. But many dealings are not so simple. Medieval trade often runs on short memory and shorter credit. A merchant known to the house may ask to settle after he has sold cloth in the market. A carter may count on a master elsewhere to pay the charge later. A neighbour may take ale today and promise eggs, labour, or coin tomorrow. None of this is unusual. None of it is entirely comfortable. So you reckon. Quietly, again and again. One bed shared in the loft, 2 measures of ale, bread at the board, a bowl of pottage, hay for one horse, oats for another, perhaps a little extra straw because the animal came in wet and shivering. The sums themselves are small. That is almost the trouble. A large debt announces itself. A dozen tiny ones dissolve unless someone keeps them together. If the household reads and writes well, some of this may go into marks on parchment or in a book. If not, then speech, memory, and simple tallying carry much of the burden. Historians cannot say that every innkeeper kept accounts in the same fashion. Some houses were more orderly, some were more prosperous. Some no doubt relied on one spouse who could write, or on a clerk for fuller reckonings. Others likely managed with cut notches, spoken witnesses, and habit. The details shift from house to house. The pressure does not. By evening, someone must know what is owed. You can feel this pressure in the objects around you. The cask is not just a cask. It is stock that drains a little with every cup. The loaf is not just a loaf. It is cost, labour, grain price, and the old long reach of the assize that says bread and ale should answer to rule as well as appetite. Even the bedding has an account hidden inside it. Straw must be found, blankets wear thin. Sheets, where a better room has them, must be washed and dried when weather allows. Every item in the house moves slowly toward replacement. And so the innkeeper's skill is not only in smiling at guests or stirring a pot, it lies in this plain sorting of obligation. You listen to one man say he drank only 1 cup. Another remembers 2. A servant speaks from the doorway and says he carried a 2nd jug. No one is angry. Not yet. It is simply the soft daily friction of trade. A house of food and drink produces many such moments. You learn not to flare. You learn to repeat the matter in a level tone. 1 cup earlier, 1 with the bread, another when the horse was led round. There, that is the count. If the guest is honest, he nods. If he is embarrassed, he nods more slowly. There is status in this work, though not a grand one. An innkeeper handles ready money more often than many labourers do. That can make the trade seem comfortable from outside. But money passing through the hand is not the same as money staying there. Much of it is already spoken for. Some of it never arrives. A bad week of weather can keep travellers away. A spoiled cask can turn value sour. A fine from local officers over ale quality or measure can bite hard. A poor harvest lifts grain prices and squeezes the whole business from both ends, since guests still want to eat and drink, but barley and bread cost more before they ever reach the table. In a corner, or perhaps hanging where the household can reach it, there may be a board marked with old cuts and fresh ones, a practical aid more than a treasure. Whether your inn uses such a thing exactly is impossible to prove for this one imagined day, but tools like tally sticks and notched records are well within the habits of medieval trade. You can imagine the thumb running over old grooves, lodging here, ale here, fodder there. Little separations for a world built from little separations. A house survives by knowing the difference between what has been promised and what has been paid. Outside, a cart rattles somewhere on the street. Inside, a cup is set down. The fire makes its low, shifting sound. Nothing about this moment would interest a chronicler, yet this quiet arithmetic is the center of the trade. Without it, the bread is gone, the casks are empty, the hayloft thins and goodwill becomes hunger. So you stand in the ordinary half-light and keep the day tied together. Not with ceremony, not with anything heroic, only by remembering that a bed, a bowl, a measure, a horse, a candle end, and a scrap of trust must all be counted before night comes back again. The afternoon lengthens almost without notice. In a modern room, a clock would declare it. Here, the change comes by other means. The fire sits lower. The doorway light shifts across the floor. The horses in the yard grow quieter after feed, then stir again. And somewhere beyond the roofs and lanes, the bell marks another part of the day. You do not need exact minutes to feel the world moving. Medieval towns and villages live by habit, by weather, by the church's hours, by market custom, by the road, by the stomach. Bells matter not because everyone counts them with precision, but because they help gather the day into known pieces. Morning was for setting the house upright. Midday was for serving and carrying. Now this later stretch belongs to preparation, mending, watching, and the small acts that keep evening from turning unruly. So you pass from one task to the next, in no grand order. A bench is shifted back where it belongs. A cup with a cracked lip is set aside rather than trusted to one more filling. The cask is checked, not ceremoniously, just with the eye and the hand. How much remains? Whether the ale still keeps well, whether another vessel must be made ready. In a trade watched by custom and by officers who may inspect quality and measure, neglect is a risk you cannot afford to make into a habit. Much depends on reputation. A house known for sour drink, weak measure, or careless dealing may still scrape by for a while, but not comfortably. This is one reason the afternoon is so full, even when no guest is speaking to you. The inn must be reset before the next wave of need arrives. More water is wanted, water for cooking, water for washing vessels, water for the stable, water for people who come in dusty from the lane. Almost all of it must be carried by hand, bucket after bucket, from well, conduit, stream, or whatever source the place depends upon. A visitor notices the cup. You notice the labor behind the cup. If weather is fair, bedding may be lifted, shaken or aired as much as the house allows. Not every inn can do this often, and not every house has the space or linen to make such care regular. The evidence is uneven. Still, any chance to push out damp and stale smell is useful. Shared beds and pallets gather the human day into them. Breath, wool fibers, dust, hair, bits of straw. The faint sourness left by travel and sleep. To freshen even a little is worth doing. If weather is poor, then much stays as it is, and night will ask people to lie down in what the last night has left. The floor asks its own attention. Rushes or straw underfoot soften dirt and catch spills, but how often they are changed in a middling inn is hard to know with certainty. Wealth, traffic, season, and simple standards of care all matter. On a busy route in wet weather, no floor remains fresh for long. You may sweep, you may stir what lies there. You may replace a little near the hearth or board where the worst of the wear gathers, but no amount of effort turns a working inn into a noble chamber. It becomes only less disordered than it was an hour before. Sometimes that is enough. The household moves through these motions together. One person cuts more bread, another sorts onions. A younger helper carries peelings or slops away. Someone in the yard rubs down a horse that may need to continue tomorrow. Family business means there is little clean line between home and work. The same hands that soothe a child may scrub a pot. The same voice that settles a guest's account may call someone to fetch kindling. In many medieval inns, women are not simply present, but active in brewing, victualling, serving, reckoning, and managing. The records do not always name labour fairly, but the labour is there all the same, and over everything hangs the wider frame of rule and demand. Taxes do not arrive every hour, but they shape the hour nonetheless. Rent, dues, assessments, and the memory of past levies sit behind the day's small exchanges. After the Black Death, labour itself has become a more difficult matter in many places. Wages, service, hiring, and expectation no longer rest where they once did. If you need a reliable servant, an ostler, a brewer, or kitchen help, the finding of such people may cost more or prove less certain than it did in earlier generations. The inn therefore leans heavily on those already under its roof. None of this sounds dramatic. That is because it is not dramatic. It is only the ordinary framework of the trade. An innkeeper does not simply wait by the fire for colourful travellers to tell stories. Most of the time you are managing fuel, spoilage, labour, vessels, feed, memory and time measured by bells and daylight. Hospitality rests on dull preparation. Comfort rests on repeated lifting. Even welcome has to be hauled in buckets. Now the afternoon edges nearer to evening. The room is not full yet, but it is readying itself to be. Shadows gather in the rafters. The smell of smoke grows a little thicker as the fire is encouraged again. Outside, the road will begin sending its later people, those who have judged the light and decided how much farther they dare go before stopping. Before they arrive, there is this short, plain breathing space, not empty, never empty, just steady enough that you can feel the whole house balancing for a moment on custom, bells, hands and habit. And in that quiet balance, the day continues to lean towards supper. And now the road has finished deciding for the day. The later travellers come in by degrees rather than all at once. One with mud drying in ridges on the hem of a cloak. Another with a pack horse that lowers its head as soon as it smells hay. A carter who asks first about the stable and only after that about his own supper. This is the evening truth of the house. People may speak of hospitality as if it begins at the table, but so often it begins in the yard, with hooves, harness, wet leather, and the question of where a tired animal can stand for the night. You meet each arrival with the same measured eye. Not suspicious exactly, just practical. How many people? How many beasts? How much baggage? How much money perhaps, though that part is not always asked directly. Some will pay at once. Some will claim to settle after meat and drink. Some are known by face, if not by name. Some carry letters, wares, tools, or pilgrim signs that say enough about the road behind them. And some simply look like people who need a corner of shelter before darkness closes the rest of the way. Inside, the room has changed again. The plain breathing space of late afternoon is gone. In its place comes that ordinary fullness that never quite becomes comfort. Heat gathers low around the fire and then drifts upward into the rafters where old smoke already lives. Damp wool begins to steam. Wooden cups knock softly against boards. Spoons move through pottage with the quiet patience of hunger. There is talk, but not the kind a poem would keep. Road talk, price talk, weather talk. A wheel mended badly in the last town. A bridge passable this morning and perhaps not tomorrow. Whether oats will cost more after the next market day. Whether the rain means anything. Whether it means nothing. You carry bowls. You answer small questions. You judge portions without seeming to judge them. A thicker dip for the man who has paid for bed and board together. A narrower one where credit already stretches thin. Bread passed, cheese cut, onions shared out, ale drawn again. Ordinary food, the sort that fills more by warmth than by surprise. Whatever meat there is has long since ceased to be the centre of the meal. It is broth and bread that hold the evening upright. The house does not offer much privacy. In a wealthier place there might be a few chambers set aside for better guests, and in some towns larger inns could manage more separation than a smaller house ever could. But in a middling working inn like this one, privacy is a thing spoken of more by custom than by architecture. A traveller with enough coin may get a better bed or a quieter corner. A traveller with less must accept what space the building can spare. Shared rooms, shared pallets, shared warmth, shared breath. The body learns quickly that sleep in such a place is a public bargain. So when the count of sleepers rises, another kind of labour begins. Not the labour of carrying, though there is still plenty of that. The labour of fitting. One chamber already has two. A loft can take one more if the weather stays dry and the man is not too proud. A servant can move to a bench. A child can sleep nearer the hearth. A pair travelling together may accept floor bedding rather than insist on a frame. A stranger who arrives too late to bargain much will often agree to whatever is left, because outside there is only darkness, mud, and the poor comfort of not being indoors. You know the bedding by touch almost as much as by sight. Straw pallets a little flattened at the centre. Wool blankets carrying the day's warmth from the hearth if they have been aired near it. Coarser covers for ordinary use. Better linen only where the house can manage it, and not always. Historians can say with some confidence that many inn beds were shared and that private sleeping was limited in ordinary places. The exact arrangement in any one house changes with season, traffic, and means. But the general fact remains plain enough. Night lodging in the Middle Ages is often less a private room than a negotiated patch of rest. You lift one blanket, shake another, turn a mattress where the stuffing has slumped hard to one side. Dust rises in a small, tired cloud and settles again. A helper brings more rushes for the floor where old ones have gone too sour under damp boots. How often such coverings are changed in houses like this is not certain. Wealth, weather, and how many feet have crossed the boards all matter. Still, tonight at least, you spread what can be spread and cover what can be covered. There is no dream of freshness here, only the effort to keep things from becoming worse. A better dressed guest asks whether there is a chamber apart. The answer is soft and apologetic and unchanged. None left, not now. Perhaps if someone rises before dawn. He does not like it, but disliking it makes no more room appear. In the end, he accepts a place with a screen of hanging cloth and the comfort of being a little farther from the door. This too is part of the trade. Not giving people what they imagine travel ought to be, but giving them the nearest thing the house can honestly provide. Down in the stable, the last animals are settled. Hay shaken out. Oats measured with care because fodder is not cheap, and because an overfed horse wastes as surely as an underfed one weakens. Water carried one more time. The sound there is slower than in the hall. Chewing. a hoof shifting in straw, the creak of leather easing as straps are loosened. Animal care is one of the quiet centres of the business, though the common room likes to pretend the candles and cups matter more. A guest may complain loudly about a thin supper. A horse says nothing at all. Yet if the horses are neglected, the house loses trust more quickly than from any dull bowl of broth. Back upstairs, the places for sleep are nearly spoken for. You begin to know, with that inward arithmetic learned by repetition, who is lying where. The carrier near the wall, the pair of merchants in the loft, the local man too merry to walk home, stretched near his friends where they can turn him onto his side if he snores too deeply. The quiet woman travelling with bundles, given the bed nearest another household rather than left entirely among strangers. The servant rolled in a cloak close to the kitchen warmth. No grand design, only adjustment. A house bending itself around the number of bodies the road has delivered. The candles shorten. Tallow softens and hardens again in uneven rims. Their light is enough for faces, not enough for corners. In ordinary English inns, evening light is usually the cheaper, smoky sort, not the cleaner wax used by richer houses or churches. So everything after sunset looks partial. Edges blur. Coins must be brought near the flame to be read. Expressions are guessed at from tone more than from feature. The whole room becomes a place of half-seeing. That half-light suits the business of the last bed. No one needs to inspect it too closely. No one expects ease. They ask instead for dryness, relative warmth, and the right not to be robbed, disturbed, or left outside. By those measures, a modest inn can still feel almost generous. At last, the final place is found. Not a fine place, not even a very comfortable one. A patch in the loft under the slope of the roof, where hay dust hangs in the beams, and the boards remember every footstep beneath them. But it is under cover. It is out of the wind. It is near the breathing of other sleepers, which in a hard world can count as comfort enough. You lay down the last blanket and smooth it once with a tired hand. The house is full, or near enough. Supper bowls cool. Stable sounds settle. Voices in the room begin to drop from speech into murmur. Night has not finished with you yet. There are reckonings still to make, doors still to mind, embers still to judge. But this part is done. Every ordinary scrap of shelter the building can offer has now been measured out. And under smoke, tallow, and worn timber, the inn takes one more careful breath before the darker hours begin. The house has settled as far as it is going to settle. That is the first thing you feel now. Not silence, never silence. Only the softer kind of noise that comes when work has passed its busiest hour, and the building begins, at last, to carry the sleepers for you. Somewhere above, a bed rope gives a small complaint. Somewhere near the hearth, one guest clears his throat in his sleep and turns over into the wool. In the stable beyond the wall and yard, a horse stamps once, then stands quiet again. The sounds are thin now, spread out, no longer asking for bowls or benches or another ladle of ale. You remain below them all with the last part of the day still resting in your hands. A tallow candle burns on the table in a shallow pool of grease. Its light is poor and yellow and costly in its own small way. It does not brighten the room so much as touch a few near things and leave all the rest in brown shadow. The board of accounts, the bit of coin, the cup with a heel of ale gone stale, the knife, the edge of your sleeve, the grain of the table where years of elbows have polished the wood. Beyond that narrow circle, the common room looks half returned to timber and smoke. You stand for a moment before sitting. Your knees feel the whole day in them. So do your shoulders. Innkeeping is sometimes spoken of as if it were chiefly talk and serving. But the body knows better. The body has lifted buckets, bent over bedding, dragged benches, steadied casks, carried fuel, judged steam, hauled fodder, and walked the same few stretches of floor until they become the map of your bones. Hospitality sounds gentle. Much of its labor is not gentle at all. It is only ordinary, which is not the same thing. You lower yourself to the bench and bring the little pile of payments and promises toward you. Some are pennies, some are halves or farthings. Some are not coin at all yet, only remembered words attached to familiar faces. A carter who says he will settle on the return road. A local man whose brother pays true at market, though not always quickly. A traveller with decent boots and tired horse gear who gave enough this evening and no more. A pair of pilgrims who shared a place and stretched one supper between them. A servant sent ahead by a better-born master, speaking as though certainty itself were payment. You sort them all in the weak candlelight. This is the quiet arithmetic that keeps the house alive. Ale, bread, pottage, oats, hay, a place by the hearth, a shared bed, a bit of floor, stable room, candle use. Fuel burned a little faster because the air is damp. Nothing here is grand, yet every small thing has been taken from some store that must be filled again later with labor or coin. If you keep marks, you keep them simply. A tally board, perhaps. Notches cut by habit more than ceremony. Or a scrap of writing if someone in the house writes with more ease. Or, mostly, memory, tested aloud. Historians cannot always say just how one middling inn arranged its nightly reckoning, and houses surely differed. But many such businesses lived by mixtures of memory, speech, and rough record rather than tidy pages fit for a chest. So you murmur the charges softly to yourself, as though saying them can pin them more firmly to the night. 1 for supper, 1 for ale, 1 for bed space, 1 for the horse, 1 for oats, half remembered, half paid, fully owed. The candle flutters when a draught slips under the door. You stop and listen. At this hour, every small movement matters because it might become work. Another knock, a late rider, a loosened shutter, a dog after scraps, a horse worrying at its tether, a guest sick from road wear or too much drink. Most nights the sound comes to nothing, only wind touching bad seams in old timber. But an inn is never allowed the deep, careless sleep of a house with no strangers in it. Even when the room is full of breathing and the latch is set, some part of you stays awake in advance. No second knock comes, so you return to the counting. The coins are cool against the skin of your thumb. Some are clipped or worn smooth at the face. They have passed through many hands before reaching yours. Baker's hands, carter's hands, priest's hands, women buying salt fish, boys sent on errands, men bringing wool to market. Money in a place like this does not arrive nobly. It arrives damp, greasy, delayed, argued over, and often already promised elsewhere. By morning, some of what sits before you will belong, in truth, not to you at all. It will belong to the brewer who supplied grain, or the butcher, or the carter who brings fuel, or the landlord who waits for rent, or the tax that appears again as sure as frost. That is one of the quieter truths of the trade. The inn looks, from the road, like a place that receives. A sign overhead, a fire, a door, drink and shelter flowing inward. Yet much of your life is made of things flowing out in wages when help is needed, out in candles burned down to stubs, out in blankets thinned by use, out in broken cup handles and leaking hoops, and hay eaten faster in bad weather, out in trust given to people who may not return by the promised feast day. The day fills the house. The night empties it back into numbers. You rub it a smear on the board with the side of your hand. Tallow and ash make everything slightly greasy. The room smells different now than it did at supper. Less onion, less steam, more old smoke, more damp wool, more tired bodies giving off the slow heat of sleep. Rushes underfoot hold the memory of the day in them. Mud, drips of ale, bits of straw. Perhaps they were changed recently, perhaps only stirred and freshened. That part is harder for historians to pin down in ordinary houses, and it likely varied with wealth, season, and traffic. But however often they are renewed, the floor tells on every guest. It keeps what falls. You look once more toward the hearth. The fire must not be left lively enough to wander where it should not, and must not be starved so much that morning begins from cold ash. So you rise again and go to it with the small heaviness of a body that has already sat down too soon. With the poker, you draw inward what still glows. A dim red answers from under the black. You lay the fuel so that it may last. Banked, not smothered. Kept, not spent. This too is account-keeping only done in wood and heat instead of coin. Near the wall, a bench still leans out from the table where the last man left it. You set it straight. A cup remains. You empty the stale swallow onto the rushes near the threshold, where worse has landed before, then place the cup with the others to be rinsed later. One blanket edge trails from a sleeper's shared pallet near the warmer part of the room. You bend and tuck it back over an exposed foot. The man does not wake. He only exhales and settles deeper, trusting the house without knowing that this trust has shape and cost and hands. That may be the truest form of your work by night, not the pouring, not the taking of coins, not even the assigning of places. It is the keeping together of many fragile comforts at once. Enough warmth that no one curses the cold before dawn. Enough order that no horse slips loose in the dark. Enough fairness that tomorrow's talk in the street does not spoil the next week's custom. Enough memory that one unpaid bed does not become two, then six, then hunger. Enough watchfulness that a building made mostly of wood survives another night with fire inside it. Outside, the bells are long since done. Time is no longer counted publicly now. It is counted by the shortening candle and the heaviness behind your eyes. You gather what coin there is. You set aside what must be remembered. If there is a tally board, it goes near the place where your hand will find it again tomorrow. If there is a scrap with marks, it is weighted so no stray draft carries a debt into the ashes. You rest your palm on the table for a breath, feeling old nicks in the wood. This same board will hold breakfast bread soon enough. Then trenchers, then elbows, then another night's reckoning. The inn does not really end. It only folds itself a little and opens again. Before lying down, you listen once more. The stable is quiet. The room is quiet. The hearth is low. The door is barred. The candle is nearly done. So at last you take yourself toward your own narrow rest, not into privacy because there is little of that here, but into nearness, near the embers, near the sleepers, near the sounds you must answer if they change. Your place is not the finest place in the house. It is simply the place from which you can rise fastest. You lower yourself into it with tired care. The blanket smells faintly of smoke. The dark is never complete because the banked fire keeps one small red eye open across the room. Tomorrow we'll ask for the same hands again. More ale to draw, more straw to shake, more faces to judge kindly but not foolishly, more little debts to carry until they become coin or trouble. But not yet. For now the inn has done what it can do. It has fed some, sheltered some, warmed some, and measured out the night as evenly as a worn house knows how. Around you, timber creaks. A horse breathes through the wall. Someone murmurs in sleep and falls still. And with those ordinary sounds gathered close, the long day finally loosens. Not finished forever.